They were queens, regents, and noblewomen, but behind the silks and crowns, some mothers hid secrets soaked in blood. In medieval Europe, power wasn't inherited peacefully, it was seized, stolen, or smothered into place. Tonight, we step into shadowed halls and candlelit chambers, where royal mothers like Queen Ælfthryth of England were whispered to have orchestrated murder, not for ambition, but for their children's crowns. These are stories of love twisted by power and thrones secured by betrayal. Settle in as we unravel the chilling legacy of medieval motherhood. On Bore Me to Sleep. The storm clawed at Corfe Castle like a living thing, its howl seeping through mortared joints as Queen Ælfthryth paced her bedchamber. Rain sluiced down the thick glass, warping the view of the drowning Dorset countryside into a gray smear. Each footfall echoed on rush-strewn flagstones, a counterpoint to the gale's fury. She paused at the carved oak chest, fingers brushing its iron lock. Inside lay the vial, belladonna, a peasant crone's gift years ago, wrapped in prophecy. For the wolf at your door, my queen. Is that what Edward is? A wolf? Her stepson. 16. Pious. Beloved by the Witan. And my Athelred? The image of her 7-year-old son, soft-cheeked, clutching her hand after a nightmare, flashed behind her eyes. He'd be devoured alive in Edward's court. A knock shattered the silence. Wolf here, her guard captain, stood drenched in the doorway. Riders, my queen. A dozen. Armed. A woman leads them, demands audience. Says she's from Mercia. Ælfthryth's pulse quickened. Mercia. Home. Bring her to the lesser hall. Alone. Disarm her men. Double the guard on Ethelred's chamber. The lesser hall was a vault of shadows, torchlight licking at tapestries of long-dead saints. Ælfthryth sat stiffly on the oak chair serving as her throne, Edgith a silent sentinel beside her. The doors groaned open. Guards flanked a hooded figure limping on a staff, mud-caked cloak dripping onto rushes. The stranger pushed back her hood. Ælfthryth's breath hitched. Ethelflaed? Her sister's face was a map of grief, eyes hollow, cheeks gaunt. She stumbled forward, collapsing into Ælfthryth's arms. The stench of wet wool and fear clung to her. Edric, Ethelflaed sobbed, her voice shredded. They took him. Masked men. Broke into Tamworth Hall. Killed the guards. Left this. She thrust a crumpled parchment into Ælfthryth's hand. The crude letters bled through the page. Your son for the throne. Keep your bastard from the crown. Edward will be king. Ice flooded Ælfthryth's veins. She gripped the parchment, knuckles white. Bastard. The word hissed in her mind. They'd stolen her 10-year-old nephew. Framed her for the threat hanging over Edward. And Edward arrives tomorrow. Who? Ethelflaed clawed at her sister's sleeves. Who hates you enough to steal my child? Ælfthryth's mind raced. Rival ealdormen? Bishops who'd condemned her marriage? Or Edward himself, engineering her ruin? She knelt, cradling her sister's face. We'll find him. I swear it. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Edgith, whined. Now, to the guards, not a word. Especially to the Etheling. As Edgith hurried out, Ælfthryth's gaze fixed on the dying torchlight. The vial in the chest seemed to pulse in her thoughts. Monstrous Mother, the note branded her. Fury, cold and sharp, crystallized in her chest. They'd made it personal. They'd used a child. Let them see a monster, she thought, helping Ethelflaed to a bench. But first, they'll learn what a cornered mother truly is. The next morning dawned brittle and clear. Sunlight speared through narrow windows, glinting off puddles in the courtyard. Ælfthryth stood at the battlements, watching servants scrub mud from the cobbles. Ethelflaed slept fitfully in the guest chamber, drugged with poppy syrup. Below, wolf-ear-drilled guards, swords clashing, shields thudding. Each strike echoed her own thrumming tension. Edward comes today. A small hand tugged her skirt. Athelred peered up, blue eyes wide. Mama? And Ethelflaed cried all night. Did the storm scare her? Ælfthryth smoothed his flaxen hair. She's sad, my heart. Her boy is lost. Like when I lost my wooden knight in the rushes? Like that. She forced a smile. But we'll find him. Now, go to Lady Wolfrun. She has honey cakes. As Athelred scampered off, Edgith approached, face pinched. The riders who brought your sister, my queen. Their leader, Osric, he's Mercian, loyal to your father's house. Swears they encountered no one on the road. But she lowered her voice. He found this near Tamworth. She pressed a small object into Ælfthryth's palm, a bronze cloak pin, shaped like a coiled serpent. Ælfthryth's blood chilled. She knew that pin, Alderman Ordgar, Edgar's closest advisor, a man who'd openly sneered at Ethelred's weak blood. He'd worn this pin at Edgar's funeral. Ordgar. The pieces shifted. He wanted Edward crowned, a pliable youth he could control. Ethelred's claim threatened that. And framing Ælfthryth for kidnapping? It would shatter her influence, clear Ethelred's path to the throne or his grave. Send for Ordgar, Ælfthryth said softly. Invite him to witness Edward's arrival. Say I seek his counsel. Edgith paled. My queen, if he's behind this. Exactly. Ælfthryth's smile was thin. Let the fox enter the henhouse. We'll see if he licks his lips. The courtyard buzzed as Edward's retinue clattered through the gates. 30 riders, nobles, priests, housecarls, and ringmail. At their center, Edward sat tall on a dappled gray courser. At 16, he had Edgar's strong jaw but none of his fire. His face was pale beneath a simple circlet, eyes downcast as if in prayer. Beside him rode a broad-shouldered man with a grizzled beard and a bronze serpent pin glinting on his cloak, Ordgar. Ælfthryth descended the keep steps, her crimson gown pooling on the wet stones. Welcome, stepson. She offered her hand. Edward dismounted stiffly, brushing his lips to her knuckles. His touch was cold. Queen Ælfthryth. His voice was reedy. I come to honor my father's memory and see my brother. Liar, Ælfthryth thought, scanning his entourage. Priests, young nobles. No sign of a captive boy. Athelred is at his lessons. You'll see him at supper. She turned to Ordgar. My lord alderman, your presence gladdens me. We have much to discuss. Ordgar's smile didn't reach his flinty eyes. The queen honors me. As servants led the party inside, Ælfthryth caught Wulfhere's gaze. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Guards posted. Athelred safe. Supper in the great hall was a tapestry of tension. Firelight danced on silver platters heaped with roast boar and honeyed parsnips. Edward picked at his food, flanked by whispering priests. Ordgar held court at the high table, booming tales of Edgar's battles. Ælfthryth watched him, sipping spiced wine. Tell me, Lord Ordgar, she interrupted, her voice slicing through his story. How fares your estate at Wareham? I hear the marsh fever took many of your thralls this autumn. Ordgar's smile faltered. It passes, my queen. God's will. God's will? Or poor drainage? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I recall Edgar saying your lands were damp, prone to miasmas, and vermin. His knuckles whitened on his goblet. Vermin can be exterminated. Indeed. Ælfthryth held his gaze. But some vermin wear crowns, or covet them. A muscle twitched in Ordgar's jaw. Before he could reply, a shriek echoed from the corridor. Hi, childish. Athelred burst into the hall, tears streaking his face, pursued by a flustered Lady Wolfrun. Mama! A monster! In the garden! A man with no face! Silence crashed over the hall. Edward rose, alarmed. Ordgar froze, his goblet halfway to his lips. Ælfthryth swept Athelred into her arms. Hush, my heart. A nightmare. No. Athelred sobbed, burying his face in her neck. He was real. By the old yew tree. He had a snake on his cloak. Ælfthryth's eyes locked with Ordgar's. The serpent pin. He'd been near the nursery. Her voice cut like ice. Captain Wulfhere. Search the garden. Now, as guards thundered out, Ordgar stood, face mottled. The prince is distraught. The storm. Quiet. Ælfthryth didn't look at him. She rocked Æthelred, humming an old Mercian lullaby. Inside, her mind raced. Was it Ordgar's man? A warning? Or a clumsy attempt to snatch Æthelred? Wulfhere returned, grim-faced. In his hand, a strip of torn, muddy wool dark green, the color of Ordgar's household livery. Found snagged on the you, my queen. All eyes turned to Ordgar. Edward stared, aghast. Lord Ordgar? What is this? Ordgar's composure cracked. A trick. This woman, he pointed a shaking finger at Ælfthryth. She plants lies. She fears Edward's claim. She'd poison us all. The word poison hung in the air. Ælfthryth's blood roared. He knows. Or suspects. She stood, Æthelred clinging to her. Arrest him. Guards surged forward. Ordgar drew his dagger. Touch me, and the boy dies. He lunged, not at the guards, but toward a side door leading to the inner chambers. To Æthelred's room? To Æthelflaed? Chaos erupted. Nobles scrambled back. Priests prayed. Edward stood paralyzed. Wulfhere tackled Ordgar, sending them crashing into a trestle table. Platters shattered. Wine flowed like blood. Ælfthryth shielded Æthelred's eyes. Take him, she ordered Edgith. As her maid whisked the sobbing prince away, Ælfthryth strode to the struggling men. Wulfhere had Ordgar pinned, the dagger skittering across the stones. Ordgar spat blood. You won't win. Witch? My men have the Mercian brat. Harm me, and he's fed to the hogs. Ælfthryth knelt, her face inches from his. Where is Edric? He grinned, teeth red. Where you'll never find him. She drew the small knife from her girdle, a gift from Edgar, its hilt set with garnets. She pressed the blade to Ordgar's throat. The hall held its breath. Edward gasped. Stepmother! In God's name. God has no place here, Ælfthryth whispered, her eyes never leaving Ordgar's. Only mother's. She nicked his skin. A bead of blood welled. Last chance, Ordgar. Where's my nephew? His bravado flickered. The old mill. By the Stour. But he's guarded. You'll never. Ælfthryth stood. Wulfhere. Take 20 men. Ride now. She wiped the blade on Ordgar's cloak. And Lord Ordgar? If Edric is harmed, you'll pray for the hogs. As guards dragged Ordgar away, Ælfthryth turned to Edward. His face was ashen, his pious certainty shattered. You see, stepson, she said softly. The throne demands more than prayers. It demands a mother's ruthlessness. She swept from the hall, the taste of blood and power sharp on her tongue. The game had turned, but Edric was still lost, and the vial in her chest waited, patient as death. The silence in Corfe Castle's great hall thickened like congealing blood after Ordgar's confession. Ælfthryth stood over the bound alderman, the torn scrap of his livery clutched like a viper in her fist. The smoky torchlight carved deep hollows beneath her eyes, making her look less like a grieving queen and more like a vengeful specter. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, consuming fury. They threaten my son. They steal my sister's child. They think grief has made me weak. The thought crystallized into resolve as sharp as the dagger at her hip. Take him, she commanded the guards, her voice low and brittle. The deepest cell. No light. No sound. If he utters one word, gag him. If he struggles, break a finger. She watched as they hauled the sputtering Ordgar away, his threats dissolving into muffled grunts down the stone corridor. Only then did she allow herself to tremble, turning to her captain, Wulfric, a grizzled man whose loyalty was etched into the scar bisecting his cheek. Ride, she breathed, the single word laden with the weight of kingdoms. Take your swiftest men. Find Edric. Bring him back unharmed. If they have harmed a hair on his head. She didn't finish. The unspeakable promise hung in the air. Wulfric nodded grimly, his hand resting on his sword hilt. The ransom note said the woods north of Wareham, near the old Roman road marker, Your Grace. We know those copses. We'll find him. Go now, Ælfthryth urged, her gaze fixed on the heavy oak door Wulfric vanished through. Every moment is a knife at my sister's throat. The image of Ælfthryth, wild-eyed with terror, clawed at her composure. My fault. My ambition drew this shadow over her. The guilt was a fresh wound, raw and stinging beneath the steel of her purpose. She turned, her velvet slippers whispering on the rushes, and ascended the spiral staircase towards her private chambers. She needed to see Ælfthryth, to touch him, to assure herself he was safe, still innocent amidst the monstrous game unfolding around him. She found him not in his bed, but huddled by the hearth in her own solar, a small, pale figure wrapped in a fur too large for him. Ælfthryth, his nurse, sat nearby, her face taut with worry. Ælfthryth scrambled up as Ælfthryth entered, flinging himself against her skirts. "Mother, the monster!" he cried, his voice thin with remembered terror. It had eyes like fire, and the snake. It hissed at me. Ælfthryth sank to her knees, gathering him close. He smelled of wool and the faint sweetness of milk. She buried her face in his soft, dark hair, inhaling the scent of his life, the life she was drenching in blood to protect. "Hush, my little king," she murmured, the endearment slipping out unbidden, a dangerous confession even within these stone walls. "The monster is gone. Wulfric has chased him far away. You are safe." "But he looked like a man." "Mother," Ælfthryth whispered, pulling back slightly, his large, dark eyes searching her face. "Ordgar. He smiled at me yesterday. Why would he be a monster today?" The innocent question pierced Ælfthryth's armor. How to explain the shifting masks of ambition, the smiles that hid daggers? "Sometimes, my love," she said, choosing her words with the care of a scribe illuminating a holy text. "Men wear masks. They pretend to be friends when their hearts are full of darkness. They covet what is not theirs." She smoothed his hair. "Like the crown." Ælfthryth frowned, a miniature echo of his father's stubbornness. "But the crown is Edward's," father said. A flicker of irritation sparked within her, quickly doused by pragmatism. Edgar's ghost haunted every corner of this castle, his pronouncements still law in his son's mind. "Your father loved Edward," she conceded, the words ash in her mouth. "But kings must think of the future, of strength." "Edward," she trailed off, unwilling to poison the boy completely, yet unable to leave the seed unplanted. "Edward is young. England needs a strong protector." She kissed his forehead. "Sleep now. Ælfthryth will stay." She watched as the nurse gently led the drowsy boy towards his adjoining chamber. Only when the door clicked shut did Ælfthryth allow her shoulders to slump. She moved to the narrow window slit, pressing her forehead against the cold stone. Below, the bailey was a hive of grim activity. Torches flared as Wulfric's men mounted up, their chainmail glinting dully. Hooves clattered on the cobbles, fading swiftly into the night. The wind moaned through the battlements, carrying the salt tang of the distant sea and the earthy scent of the Dorset hills. It sounded like the lament of the dead. "Where are you, Edric?" She pleaded silently, her knuckles white on the stone sill. "Forgive me, Ælfthryth." Her sister's face swam before her, not the terrified woman of the afternoon, but the laughing girl she'd shared secrets within the sun-dappled gardens of their youth. Now, their bond was stretched taut over the rack of power. Ordgar's words echoed. "Surrender your claim for Ælfthryth. Swear it publicly, or the boy dies." It was a masterstroke. Public renunciation would shatter her carefully cultivated influence, leaving Ælfthryth vulnerable. Refusal meant her nephew's blood on her hands. Ælfthryth would never forgive her. The kingdom would see her as the monster Ordgar had tried to paint. A soft knock shattered her reverie. Edgith, her most trusted lady in waiting, entered, her plain face etched with concern. "Your Grace," she curtsied. A rider approaches. From Winchester, bearing King Edward's standard. Ælfthryth stiffened, the chill from the stone seeping into her bones. Edward, of course, Ordgar's puppet master, or perhaps merely his dupe. Had her stepson finally decided to confront her? Her grief, her isolation, her desperate gamble. Could he sense it? Could he smell weakness? She smoothed her gown, the dark green samite suddenly feeling like a shroud. "Bring wine," she commanded, her voice regaining its steely composure. "The good Gascon, and have him brought to the lesser hall. I will receive him there." She wouldn't grant Edward the intimacy of her solar, the heart of her power. The lesser hall was neutral ground, a place for uncomfortable audiences. She descended slowly, each step measured, her mind racing. What did Edward know? Had Ordgar sent word before his capture? Was this a rescue mission for his ally, or a genuine, misguided attempt at diplomacy? She paused before the heavy oak door to the lesser hall, taking a deep breath. The scent of beeswax and damp stone filled her nostrils. She could hear the murmur of voices inside, Edward's, higher pitched than his father's, tinged with an adolescent's attempt at authority. He is still a boy playing at king, she thought, a flicker of contempt cutting through her anxiety. But boys with crowns are still dangerous. Pushing the door open, she entered. Edward stood near the empty hearth, flanked by two young thanes whose smooth faces betrayed their inexperience. He had grown taller since Edgar's funeral, his frame still lanky, but there was a new tension in his posture, a wariness in his pale blue eyes as they met hers. He wore a simple tunic of royal blue, the gold circlet of the atheling resting uneasily on his brow. He looked every inch the king in waiting, yet somehow diminished in the shadow of his formidable stepmother. "Stepmother," Edward began, his voice carefully neutral, though Ælfthryth detected the faintest tremor. He bowed, a shallow gesture that held more obligation than respect. "I came as soon as I heard about Edric. A terrible thing." His gaze darted around the sparsely furnished hall, taking in the absence of the usual courtiers, the palpable tension. "Is there news?" Ælfthryth moved to the high-backed chair placed near the cold hearth, seating herself with deliberate grace. She gestured for him to take the stool opposite. Edgith entered silently, placing a tray with wine and cups on a small table before withdrawing. "News," Ælfthryth echoed, pouring the dark red wine with steady hands. "Only darkness and treachery, Edward. My sister's child, snatched from his own home. A ransom note delivered with the arrogance of a challenge." She handed him a cup, her eyes locking onto his. "It seems there are those who believe creating chaos will serve their ends." Edward accepted the cup, but didn't drink. He shifted uncomfortably. "Chaos serves no one, stepmother. England needs stability. Especially now." He took a shallow breath. "I also heard there was an incident here with Athelred, and that Alderman Ordgar was detained. So he knows." Ælfthryth sipped her wine, letting the rich, slightly bitter flavor ground her. "An incident, yes. A coward attempted to frighten my son, your brother, within the very walls of his home. He wore Ordgar's livery." She watched Edward's face closely. His eyes widened slightly, genuine shock flickering across his features before being quickly masked. "He didn't know about the garden," she deduced. "Or he's a better actor than I credited. Ordgar." Edward sounded bewildered. "But he serves the Witan faithfully. He spoke highly of you just days ago in Winchester, urging patience and unity." He leaned forward, genuine confusion warring with suspicion. Why would he do such a thing? To threaten a child? Why indeed? Ælfthryth's voice was a low murmur, like the scrape of a blade being drawn. "Perhaps because that child stands between certain men and the power they crave? Perhaps because those men believe a grieving widow, distracted by her sister's agony, is easier to manipulate. She set her cup down with a soft click. The man who took Ælfthryth demanded I renounce Ethelred's claim to the throne, publicly, as the price for the boy's life. She let the implication hang, heavy and poisonous, in the air between them. Edward recoiled as if struck. His face paled. Renounce? But that's monstrous. To use a child like that. His outrage seemed real, fueled by a youthful sense of justice. Ethelred is my brother. He has his place, assured by father. Assured, Ælfthryth repeated softly, the word laced with centuries of broken royal promises. Yet assurances crumble like old mortar when ambition finds a chisel, Edward. Orgar confessed. Before witnesses. She saw the blood drain completely from his face now. He admitted to orchestrating Ælfthryth's abduction. He admitted the demand was his. She paused, letting the horror sink in. He sits in my dungeon now, awaiting judgment, and my men are scouring the woods near Wareham for Ælfthryth. Edward stared at her, his mouth slightly open. The confident young atheling was gone, replaced by a shocked, frightened boy confronted with the brutal reality of the game he was destined to play. Orgar confessed, he whispered. To all of it? But why tell me this? Ælfthryth rose, her figure imposing in the dim hall. She walked towards him, stopping a pace away, looking down into his wide, frightened eyes. Because, Edward, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, cold and sharp as winter iron, you need to understand the cost. You need to see the monsters that crawl from the shadows when crowns are contested. Men like Orgar see your youth, your perceived gentleness, as an opening. They act in your name, believing they serve you, or their own greed cloaked in your banner. She leaned infinitesimally closer. But know this, stepmother to king, I am not gentle. I am not patient. I am a mother, and the wolf that threatens my cubs, or the cubs of my blood. A ghost of a smile, devoid of warmth, touched her lips. Finds only my teeth. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the crackle of a single torch in its sconce. Edward's throat worked as he swallowed hard. The weight of her words, the terrifying certainty in her eyes, the unspoken warning, it pressed down on him. He looked at the woman who had always been a formidable presence, a rival for his father's ear, and saw something new, a primal force, honed by grief and fury into something utterly ruthless. The crown suddenly felt heavier, colder, on his head. Before he could formulate a response, a commotion erupted outside the hall, the urgent clatter of hooves in the bailey, shouts, the heavy thud of the main gate opening. Ælfthryth's head snapped towards the sound, her heart leaping into her throat. Wulfric, her gaze locked with Edward's for one final, searing instant, a silent communication of shared dread and desperate hope, before she swept past him, her gown whispering like a serpent over the rushes, throwing open the door to face whatever the night had brought back from the dark woods of Wareham. The fate of a child, the fragile peace of a kingdom, and the monstrous heart of a mother hung in the balance. The silence in the great hall of Corfe Castle thickened like congealing blood. Edward, his young face pale beneath the flickering torchlight, stared at Ælfthryth as if she were a creature newly crawled from the marshes, something alien, terrifying, yet impossible to look away from. Her words hung between them. This is what mothers become when their children's lives are the stake. The implication that she was that monstrous mother, coiled in the air like the serpent on Orgar's captured cloak fragment. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters, a mournful counterpoint to the crackle of the hearth fire. Ælfthryth stood rigid near the massive stone fireplace, the heat doing nothing to thaw the ice that had settled in her chest since Ælfthryth's abduction. Her gaze was fixed on the heavy oak door, willing it to open and her guards to return with her nephew safe. Every passing moment was a drop of poison in her veins. You truly believe you would kill a child? Edward's voice was thin, strained. He gestured vaguely towards the dungeon stairs where Orgar languished. Ælfthryth is barely 7 summers. Ælfthryth didn't turn. He kidnapped him, Edward. He left a note threatening his life if I did not renounce Ethelred's birthright. What part of that suggests mercy? He sees children as pawns, just as she stopped herself, biting the inside of her cheek. Just as some see stepchildren as obstacles, she thought, the unspoken accusation towards Ordgar, and perhaps, chillingly, towards herself, hanging heavy. She remembered Edgar's face, the king, her husband, cold in death just months before, the weight of the crown passing not to her bright, beloved Athelred, but to this pious, earnest boy before her. Power makes men desperate. Desperation makes them cruel. But you... Edward swallowed hard, stepping closer. The firelight caught the gold thread in his simple tunic. You threatened to have Ordgar torn apart by dogs. Is that not cruelty? Is that becoming monstrous? A sharp pang shot through Ælfthryth. She finally turned, her dark eyes meeting his. She saw not just the king, but the ghost of the small boy she had watched grow alongside her own son, the boy Edgar had brought to court years ago. There had been moments, fleeting but real, of affection. Now, only chasms of suspicion and ambition lay between them. It is necessity, Edward, she said, her voice low but resonant in the cavernous hall. Cruelty is the weapon wielded by the weak when they fear loss. I threaten Ordgar with horrors to prevent him from acting on the horrors he planned. To save Edric, to protect Athelred, to preserve something. She didn't specify what that something was. The fragile piece of the kingdom, her own fractured soul, the remnants of a family already shattered by death and ambition. Would you rather I wept and pleaded? Would that bring Edric back faster? Ordgar respects only strength. Fear is the only language he understands now. Edward flinched, looking down at his hands. Father never spoke of ruling like this. He spoke of justice, piety, law. Your father, Ælfthryth interjected, a hint of bitterness sharpening her tone despite her resolve to stay calm, ruled with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. He knew the cost of power. He knew the wolves that circle a throne, especially one held by a boy. She saw the sting in Edward's eyes at the word boy and pressed on, ruthlessly. He crushed rebellions, exiled rivals, made alliances through marriage, including ours. He did what was necessary. Do you think he wept over every decision? He grieved, yes, but he acted. Now you must act, or others will act for you. Her gaze flickered back to the door. Like Ordgar, the silence stretched again, broken only by the wind and the nervous shuffling of the few household guards stationed discreetly near the walls. Ælfthryth's mind raced. Had her men found the old mill Ordgar had named as Edric's prison? Was it a trap? Were they riding into an ambush? Images of her sister Ethelflaed's face, ravaged by grief and accusation, tormented her. You did this. Your ambition endangered my child. The ransom note's vile implication, that she herself had staged the kidnapping, was a masterstroke of Ordgar's malice. It sowed discord even within her own family. She gripped the edge of the cold stone mantelpiece until her knuckles turned white, feeling the rough-hewn rock bite into her skin. The physical pain was a welcome anchor against the churning dread. Hold fast, she commanded herself. For Athelred, for Edric, even for Edward, foolish as he is. Suddenly, the great door groaned. Both Ælfthryth and Edward snapped their heads towards it. A gust of wind and rain blew in as the door opened, revealing the hulking figure of Wulfstan, captain of her household guard. His chainmail was slick with rain and mud, his face grim beneath his helmet. He stepped inside, followed by two other mud-spattered guards. They did not have Edric with them. Ælfthryth's heart plummeted. She strode forward, skirts swishing, her regal composure momentarily cracking. Wulfstan, speak. Did you find him? Wulfstan removed his helmet, revealing a tired, weather-beaten face. He bowed deeply. "My queen, my king." He straightened, his eyes meeting Ælfthryth's, holding a complex mixture of relief and grim news. "We found the mill, your grace. It was guarded, as Ordgar said. 3 men. And Edric?" Edward asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "We fought them, sire," Wulfstan continued, his voice rough. 2 fled into the marsh. 1 we captured. He told us where the boy was hidden. Not in the mill itself, but in a root cellar nearby. He paused, his jaw working. "He's alive, your grace." Frightened, cold, but unharmed. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief threatened to choke Ælfthryth. She closed her eyes for a brief second, sending a silent prayer of thanks to the Virgin Mary. Alive, unharmed. The crushing weight on her chest lessened by a fraction. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice thick. "Outside, my queen. Leofric has him. We wrapped him in a dry cloak. He's asking for his mother." Wulfstan gestured behind him. The door opened wider, and Leofric, another guard, stepped in. Cradled carefully in his arms, swaddled in a thick gray woolen cloak far too big for him, was Edric. His small face was pale and streaked with dirt and tears, his eyes wide and haunted, darting around the unfamiliar, shadowed hall. When they landed on Ælfthryth, a small, choked whimper escaped him. "And?" His voice was a threadbare whisper. Ælfthryth crossed the distance in 3 swift strides, her regal bearing forgotten. She gently took the trembling child from Leofric, pulling him close against her, burying her face for a moment in his damp, mud-scented hair. He clung to her, his small fist clutching the fabric of her gown, his body shaking with silent sobs. "Hush, little one," she murmured, rocking him gently, her voice thick with emotion she rarely allowed to surface. "Hush now. You are safe. You are home. The bad men are gone." She felt the frantic beat of his heart against her own, a fragile, precious life pulled back from the precipice. In that moment, holding her sister's son, the monstrous queen vanished, replaced only by the fierce, protective aunt. Edward watched the scene, a complex mix of relief and discomfort on his face. He took a hesitant step forward. "Edric, thank God you are safe." Edric flinched at the king's voice, burrowing deeper into Ælfthryth's embrace. She held him tighter, her eyes meeting Edward's over the child's head. The protective fury was back, cold and sharp. "He needs warmth, broth, and his mother," she stated flatly. "Wulfstan, send riders immediately to Ælfthryth. Tell her Edric is found, unharmed, and will be brought to her with all speed. Leofric, fetch warm milk and honey, and have a maid prepare a bed by the fire in my solar." Her orders snapped out, efficient, restoring order. As Leofric hurried off, she looked back at Edward, the moment of maternal softness hardening into steely resolve. "Now, your majesty," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that made Edward stiffen. "We have a prisoner below who requires your attention, and the one Wulfstan captured. It is time for justice. Ordgar's game is over. Let us see how well he plays when the stakes are his own skin." She shifted Edric slightly, her hand protectively cradling his head. The monstrous mother, tempered by the ordeal but far from vanquished, was ready to face the architect of her family's terror. The rescue was complete, but the reckoning had only just begun. The heavy oak door to the solar groaned as it swung open, revealing Captain Wulfstan's grim silhouette against the torchlit corridor. Mud spattered his boots, and the acrid scent of damp wool and sweat clung to him. Ælfthryth rose from her chair, the parchment detailing Ordgar's confession crumpling in her fist. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird desperate for news of its fledgling. "Speak, Wulfstan," she commanded, her voice low but slicing through the tense silence. Edward shifted uneasily beside her, his youthful face pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning horror at the world his mother inhabited. Her sister Ælfthryth, silent as a wraith since Edric's abduction, finally stirred, her knuckles white as she gripped the arms of her chair. "We found him, my queen," Wulfstan rasped, his voice raw. He stepped aside. Behind him stood Brother Godric, the castle's stoic physician, supporting a small, trembling figure swathed in a guard's cloak far too large for him. "Edric!" Ælfthryth's cry tore from her throat, a raw sound of anguish and relief. She surged forward, stumbling in her haste, and fell to her knees before the boy. She pulled back the cloak's hood with trembling hands. Edric's face, usually bright with mischief, was ghostly pale, smudged with dirt and tear tracks that carved pale rivers through the grime. A livid bruise bloomed on his cheekbone, stark against his pallor. His eyes, enormous in his thin face, darted wildly, unfocused, flinching away from the sudden light and the looming figures. He was shivering violently, though not from the cold. "And mother," he whimpered, his voice a threadbare whisper. He didn't seem to recognize her at first, shrinking back into Brother Godric's legs. "Oh, my sweet boy, my darling." Ælfthryth wept, gathering him close despite his flinch. She buried her face in his matted hair, rocking him gently, murmuring endearments like a protective incantation. "You're safe now. Mother's here." Safe. Ælfthryth watched, a knot of fierce, protective rage tightening in her chest. The sight of her nephew, this fragile child broken by Ordgar's ambition, burned away any lingering shred of hesitation. Her gaze swept over him, the torn tunic, the raw skin on his wrist where ropes had bitten, the hollow terror in his eyes. This was the cost of the throne. This was the price demanded of innocence caught in the web of power she navigated. She stepped closer, her movement deliberate, regal despite the turmoil within. She knelt beside her sister, her hand hovering for a moment before gently touching Edric's cold, dirty cheek. He flinched again, but this time his wide, haunted eyes focused on her face. "Aunt," he breathed, recognition flickering. "Yes, little one," Ælfthryth murmured, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely allowed to surface, a deep, maternal tenderness reserved for the vulnerable. "You are safe within these walls now. No one will harm you again. I swear it." Her oath was a vow etched in stone, directed as much to the unseen enemy as to the trembling child. She rose, the tenderness hardening into glacial resolve as she turned to Wulfstan. "Where? How did you find him?" Her tone demanded efficiency, facts to fuel her fury. "An abandoned charcoal burner's hut, deep in the woods near the old Roman road, west of the castle, my queen," Wulfstan reported briskly. As Ordgar's confession suggested, 2 guards were left, hired thugs, not his household men. "We took them quietly." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The boy, he was bound, my queen. Gagged. Left in near darkness. They'd given him water but little food. He saw them kill a rabbit. Upset him greatly." Ælfthryth let out another choked sob, clutching Edric tighter. Ælfthryth closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing the terror, the darkness, the casual brutality inflicted upon a child to manipulate her. When she opened them, her gaze was like polished flint. "The guards, secured in the undercroft, my queen, awaiting your judgment. See that they remain there, alive, for now." Her words were clipped, final. Justice would be served, but it required information first. Her attention snapped back to Edric, still trembling in his mother's arms. "Brother Godric, attend him immediately. Warm baths, clean linen, a soothing draught. Whatever he needs. Ælfthryth, go with him. Comfort your son." Her command was gentle but brooked no argument. Her sister needed to tend to her child, and Ælfthryth needed space to unleash the storm gathering within her. As Ælfthryth, supported by the physician, led the shivering Edric away, murmuring reassurances, the solar door closed, leaving Ælfthryth, Edward, and Wulfstan in a silence thick with unspoken dread. Edward stared at the spot where his young cousin had stood, the reality of the violence inflicted finally hitting him with visceral force. "Mother," Edward began, his voice unsteady, wavering between accusation and horrified comprehension. This barbarity. Orgar ordered this? Because of me. The implication that his own claim to the throne had triggered this nightmare seemed to stagger him. Ælfthryth turned to face her stepson, her expression unreadable. Because of power. Edward, she stated flatly, moving towards the hearth where the fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows. Because men like Orgar see a crown as a prize to be seized, not a burden to be borne. They see a boy king as weakness to exploit, a grieving queen as an obstacle to remove. And they use whatever tools they find, however innocent, however fragile. She picked up the iron poker, stirring the embers violently, sending a shower of sparks flying up the chimney. Ælfthryth was merely a pawn, a message to me. She turned back, the firelight carving harsh lines on her face, making her look older, harder. Orgar demanded I renounce Ethelred's claim. He thought terrorizing my sister's child would bend my will. A bitter, mirthless smile touched her lips. He misjudged me profoundly. Edward swallowed hard. But what will you do with him, mother? With Orgar? He is an alderman. His family, the Witan. The Witan. Ælfthryth's voice was dangerously soft. She set the poker down with a deliberate clang. Let them see what their precious alderman has wrought. Let them see the bruised face of a child stolen from his bed to serve a traitor's ambition. She walked towards the door leading to the private corridor where Orgar was held. Justice, Edward, is not always found in council chambers. Sometimes it must be meted out in the dark, where monsters dwell. Come. She didn't wait for his response. Wulfstan fell into step beside her, his hand resting on the hilt of his seeks. Edward hesitated for only a heartbeat, his face pale but set with a grim determination that hadn't been there before. He followed, the weight of kingship suddenly feeling less like a golden circlet and more like a collar of cold iron. The corridor was narrow, lit by smoking torches that cast flickering, monstrous shapes on the damp stone walls. The air grew colder, damper, smelling of earth and old fear. They stopped before a heavy, iron-banded door guarded by two of Wulfstan's most trusted men. At Ælfthryth's nod, one guard drew a large key from his belt and turned it in the lock. The mechanism groaned in protest. The door swung inward, revealing a small, windowless chamber. A single torch guttered in a sconce, its fitful light barely penetrating the gloom. Orgar sat slumped on a rough stool, his fine tunic stained, his cloak of office, the one bearing the embroidered snake Ethelred had glimpsed, torn and muddy. His hands were bound tightly behind his back. He lifted his head as the door opened, his eyes, red-rimmed and defiant, locking onto Ælfthryth's. Queen Ælfthryth, he rasped, his voice hoarse but laced with contempt. Come to gloat? Or to beg? He attempted to sneer, but it faltered as he saw the sheer, unadulterated fury in her eyes, colder and more terrifying than any shouted rage. Ælfthryth stepped into the cell, the confined space seeming to shrink further with her presence. Wulfstan remained just outside the door, a silent, watchful shadow. Edward lingered in the doorway, his breath catching in the oppressive air. I come, Ælfthryth stated, her voice a low, dangerous purr that seemed to vibrate in the stones, to show you the consequence of your ambition, Orgar. She moved closer, stopping mere inches from him. He had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. Look upon the face of your accuser. She gestured behind her. Edward, understanding her intent after a moment's confusion, stepped reluctantly into the torchlight beside her. Orgar's eyes flickered to the young king, a flicker of unease finally breaking through his bravado. You dared, Ælfthryth continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing, to use the blood of my blood as a weapon against me. You stole a child. You terrified him. You left him bound in the dark, listening to death, while you sat in my hall, eating my bread, plotting my downfall. Each accusation was a hammer blow, delivered with chilling precision. Orgar shifted on the stool. A necessary stratagem, Queen, he retorted, trying to regain his bluster. To preserve the kingdom. To ensure a strong king sits the throne, not a babe suckled at the teat of a grasping woman. Edward is Edgar's true heir. You and your spawn threaten the peace. Spittle flew from his lips. Peace. Ælfthryth's laugh was short, sharp, and utterly devoid of humor. You speak of peace while you orchestrate kidnapping and terror? You poisoned the peace the moment you laid hands on my nephew. She leaned down slightly, her face close to his. He could smell the faint scent of lavender on her skin, a stark, incongruous contrast to the dungeon stench and the venom in her words. You thought to break me with fear for a child. You thought wrong. You only showed me the true depth of your monstrosity. She straightened, her gaze sweeping over him with utter disdain. Ælfthryth is safe. Found exactly where your confession led us. Your hired brutes are in chains. She saw the flicker of genuine fear in his eyes now, the realization that his gambit had failed catastrophically. Your stratagem, she hissed, has earned you only the darkest corner of hell. Ordgar's defiance crumbled. Panic replaced contempt. You cannot kill me, he blurted, straining against his bonds. I am an alderman of the Witan. My kin will demand blood price. You will plunge the kingdom into war. War. Ælfthryth echoed, her voice glacial. You started this war, Ordgar, the moment you targeted a child. And you will answer for it, not to the Witan, but to me. She took a step back, her expression settling into a mask of terrifying calm. Your fate is sealed. The only question that remains is the manner of your ending. Will it be quick, or will it be instructive? She let the implication hang in the fetid air, watching the blood drain from his face. You have until dawn to contemplate your sins and to decide if you wish to name any who shared in your treachery. Your comfort in eternity may depend upon it. Without another word, she turned. Her silk gown whispered against the stone floor as she walked towards the door. She paused only to look at Edward, whose face was a mask of shock and dawning comprehension of the ruthless calculus of power. Come, Edward, she said, her voice regaining its customary composure, though the fire still burned in her eyes. We have a kingdom to hold, and monsters to purge. She swept out of the cell, leaving Ordgar in the guttering torchlight, bound and broken, the echo of her footsteps and the finality of the slamming door the only sounds in his personal abyss. The monstrous mother had spoken. Judgment awaited the dawn. The heavy oak door to the dungeon cell slammed shut behind Ælfthryth, the iron bolt sliding home with a finality that echoed in the damp, torchlit corridor. The stench of Ordgar's fear, sour sweat and urine, seemed to cling to her woolen gown, a tangible residue of the confrontation. Beside her, Edward stood rigid, his youthful face pale beneath its scattering of freckles, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. The torchlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that made the stone walls seem to lean inwards, suffocating. Mother, Edward breathed, his voice barely a whisper that scraped against the oppressive silence. You truly threatened to gut him. Like a stag at hunt. Ælfthryth didn't pause, her stride purposeful as she ascended the narrow spiral staircase leading back to the upper levels of Corfe Castle. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear, but with the cold, focused fury of a she-wolf protecting her den. The image of Ælfthryth's tear-streaked, grimy face, the tremble in his small body when Wulfstan had carried him in, was seared onto her mind. Threatened, Edward? She replied, her voice low and steady despite the tremor in her hands, which she clenched into fists at her sides. I promised. There is a difference. Ordgar sought to tear this family apart, to murder innocents for power. He laid hands on a child of my blood. He will learn the cost before dawn breaks. She pushed open the door at the top of the stairs, emerging into the relative warmth and light of the castle's great hall. The familiar smells of wood smoke, roasting meat from the kitchens, and the underlying scent of rushes strewn on the floor were a jarring contrast to the dungeon's miasma. Servants scurried, heads bowed. Sensing the storm that had entered the room, near the massive hearth, Ælfthryth knelt, her sister's face buried in the dark curls of Ælfthryth, who sat wrapped in a thick fur mantle on a low bench. The boy stared blankly into the flames, his small hands clutching a wooden toy soldier Ælfthryth recognized as one of Ethelred's cast-offs. His silence was more chilling than any cry. Ælfthryth looked up as they approached. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, held a depth of gratitude mixed with a raw, protective fury that mirrored Ælfthryth's own. "Sister," she murmured, her voice thick. "He hasn't spoken. Not a word since Wulfstan brought him back. He just shivers." She stroked Edric's hair, her touch trembling. "What did that monster do to him?" Ælfthryth knelt beside them, the rough stone floor biting through the fabric of her dress. She reached out, not to Edric directly, but to gently cover Ethelflaed's hand where it rested on the boy's head. The contact was grounding. "He is safe now, Ethelflaed. That is what matters. The monster who took him is caged below, and he will pay." Her gaze shifted to Edric's vacant stare. "The shadows will fade, little one," she whispered, though she knew the shadows cast by such terror could linger for a lifetime. She had seen it before, in the eyes of men after battle. "You are home. You are safe with your mother and your queen." There was no response, not even a flicker. The silence screamed. Edward hovered awkwardly, shifting his weight. Should we send for the physician? Brother Oswin has salves." "Salves cannot reach where he is wounded, Edward," Ælfthryth said, rising. Her knees protested. "Time and safety are his healers now. And justice." She turned to face her stepson fully. "The boy king, crowned but untested. What you witnessed below, understand this." Orgar confessed. "He admitted the kidnapping was his doing, orchestrated to force me to renounce Ethelred's claim to the throne in your favor. He sought to use a child's terror as a weapon against this family, against the crown itself." Edward swallowed hard, his throat working. But why? I am the heir. Father named me. It is God's will and the Witan's decision. Why resort to this?" He gestured vaguely towards the dungeon stairs, his expression a battleground of confusion and burgeoning anger. "It is monstrous." A bitter smile touched Ælfthryth's lips, devoid of warmth. "Monstrous? Yes. But politics, Edward, is often the breeding ground of monsters. Ordgar saw me as an obstacle. He saw Athelred, a child of Edgar's later marriage, as a potential rival he could manipulate later or eliminate. He gambled that terrorizing my sister's child would break me, force me to yield. He underestimated a mother's wrath." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Edward could hear, though the intensity crackled between them. "He underestimated your position too. By acting thus, he challenged your legitimacy. He implied your claim needed such underhanded bolstering. He insulted your father's will and your own kingship." Edward flinched as if struck. The truth landed with the force of a warhammer. His youthful idealism about the divine right of kingship collided violently with the grubby reality of ambition and conspiracy. I never thought." He trailed off, his gaze dropping to the intricate patterns woven into the rush matting. "What will you do?" "When dawn comes. What must be done?" Ælfthryth stated flatly. "He has until first light to name those who conspired with him. If he cooperates, his death will be swift. If he remains obstinate." She left the sentence hanging, the image of her promise to Ordgar, the slow parting of flesh, vivid in the air. "His fate is sealed. The manner depends on his tongue." A commotion near the hall entrance drew their attention. Athelred, his nurse Winflaed struggling to keep hold of his small hand, burst into the hall. His face was flushed, eyes bright with unshed tears and childish indignation. He had been put to bed hours ago, clearly awakened by the castle's unrest. He broke free from Winflaed and ran towards Ælfthryth, small feet pounding on the stone flags. "Mother, he cried, flinging himself against her legs, burying his face in her skirts. The scent of lavender from the linen folds mingled with the dungeon's taint still clinging to her. I heard shouting. And the bad man, the snake man, is he gone? Did the guards catch the monster? Ælfthryth's stern expression softened, a fissure in the ice. She bent, gathering her son into her arms, his small, warm body a vital anchor against the chilling darkness she'd faced below and the cold calculations ahead. She felt the frantic beat of his heart against her own. "Hush, my little king," she murmured into his hair, breathing in the innocent scent of sleep and soap. "The bad man is caught. He is locked away deep below, where he cannot frighten anyone ever again." Æthelred pulled back slightly, his wide, trusting eyes searching her face. But he had a snake on his cloak, mother. It looked at me. In the garden. It hissed. His lower lip trembled. "He will never wear that cloak again," Ælfthryth promised, her voice thick with a ferocity she couldn't entirely mask. She smoothed his tousled hair. "You were very brave to tell me about the snake. You helped us catch him." She saw Edward watching them, a complex mixture of emotions on his face, perhaps envy for the unreserved maternal affection Æthelred received, perhaps discomfort at the raw vulnerability. Ælfthryth met her stepson's gaze over Æthelred's head. "This," her eyes seemed to say, "this is what I fight for. This innocence. This future." "Winflaed," she said, her tone gentler but still commanding, "take the atheling back to his chamber. Sing to him. Tell him stories of brave dragon slayers, not snakes in gardens." As Winflaed led the reluctant Æthelred away, his small hand clutching hers, Ælfthryth turned back to Edward and Æthelflaed. The moment of tenderness had passed, replaced by the steely resolve of the Queen Regent. "Edward," she said, "summon the trusted members of the Witan who were present in the castle, Bishop Athelwold, Alderman Ethelwine, and Bertnoth. Have them gather in the council chamber within the hour. Ordgar's treachery cannot stand alone. There are others, and we must root them out before they strike again, perhaps more directly at you or Æthelred." She saw the hesitation in his eyes. "This is your first test as king, Edward. Showing strength and decisiveness now will deter others who might harbor similar ambitions. Weakness invites the wolves." Edward straightened his shoulders, a semblance of regal bearing settling over him, though it looked fragile. "I will summon them, mother." He turned and walked towards the hall entrance, his step slower, heavier than before, burdened by the ugly truths he was learning. Ælfthryth then turned to her sister, who still knelt beside the silent Edric. "Æthelflaed," she said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Take him to my solar. Have the servants bring warm milk with honey and a bath drawn. Stay with him. Let him feel only safety and warmth. I will join you when I can." Æthelflaed nodded, tears welling again. "Thank you, Ælfthryth. Without you." She couldn't finish, the thought of losing her son too terrible to voice. She carefully gathered Edric into her arms. The boy offered no resistance, his body limp. As she carried him away, a small, broken figure swallowed by the shadows near the hearth, Ælfthryth felt a fresh wave of icy rage wash over her. Orgar would suffer. All who had a hand in this would suffer. Alone for a moment in the vastness of the great hall, the fire crackling its oblivious song, Ælfthryth closed her eyes. The weight of the crown, the burden of motherhood in a viper's nest of ambition, pressed down on her. She thought of Edgar, his strong hands, his booming laugh now silenced by the tomb. He had left her this, a fractured kingdom, rival heirs, and nobles hungry for power. She had loved him, fiercely, but survival now demanded a different kind of ferocity. She was no longer just Edgar's queen. She was Æthelred's mother, Æthelflaed's sister, the shield against the darkness. And shields, she knew, were not merely for defense. Sometimes they had to be swung. A figure materialized from the shadows near the servants' entrance, Captain Wulfstan. His weathered face grim, chainmail glinting dully. "My queen," he rasped, bowing his head. "The prisoner." He asked for water. and he claims he has names, but he will speak only to you. Alone. Ælfthryth's eyes snapped open, sharp as flint. The game was moving faster than she'd anticipated. Ordgar, broken already? Or playing one last, desperate gambit? Deny him water, she commanded, her voice like winter's stone. Let thirst sharpen his memory. Tell him I will come when I choose. In Wolfston, double the guard on the dungeon. No one enters or leaves without my express command, especially near Ordgar's cell. If he dies before dawn, by his own hand or another's, the man responsible will wish he had taken Ordgar's place. Wolfston's jaw tightened. My queen. He turned to leave. And Wolfston, she added, stopping him. The men who rescued Ælfthryth, they have my deepest gratitude. See, they are rewarded from my own coffers. Silver, not just ale. The grizzled captain managed a brief, grim smile. They did their duty, Majesty. But silver is always welcome. I'll see it done. He melted back into the shadows. Ælfthryth stood motionless for another heartbeat, listening to the settling sounds of the castle at night, the distant bark of a hound, the murmur of guards on the walls, the sigh of the wind finding cracks in the stone. Beneath her feet, deep in the earth, a traitor waited, perhaps ready to betray his fellows. In the council chamber, young Edward would be steeling himself to face his father's seasoned advisors. In her solar, her sister wept over a stolen childhood. And in his bed, her own son dreamed, blissfully unaware of the monstrous currents swirling around his future throne. She drew a deep breath, the air tasting of smoke and impending bloodshed. The night was long, and dawn would bring not peace, but judgment. She adjusted the heavy gold brooch at her shoulder, a gift from Edgar depicting a snarling wolf, a fitting emblem tonight. Then, Queen Ælfthryth, mother and monster slayer, walked towards the council chamber, her steps echoing with the grim resolve of one walking onto a battlefield only she could see, ready to shape the fate of a kingdom with the ruthless love only a mother could wield. The monstrous mothers of history were not born. They were forged in fires like this. And the forging had only just begun. The heavy oak door of the antechamber groaned shut behind Ælfthryth, sealing away the muffled sobs of Ethelflaed and the healer's low murmurs over Ælfthryth's trembling form. The scent of crushed lavender and feverfew lingered on her fingertips, a fragile counterpoint to the metallic tang of blood still haunting her memory, Ælfthryth's torn tunic, the dirt beneath his nails, the way his eyes had darted like a cornered hare's. She pressed her palms to the cold stone wall, the roughness grounding her. He is safe now, she told herself, but safety is a fleeting illusion in this nest of vipers. Beyond, in the great hall, the murmur of voices swelled like the sea before a storm. Edward had gathered the council. Her son's throne, her sister's sanity, her own legacy, all hung in the balance. She inhaled deeply, the air thick with wood smoke and the sour sweat of fear, and pushed forward. The hall was a tableau of shifting loyalties. Rushlights flickered in iron sconces, casting long, dancing shadows over the faces of the assembled ealdormen and thanes. Edward sat rigid on the carved oak throne, his youth a stark contrast to the weathered men around him. To his right, Bishop Athelwold clutched his crucifix, lips moving in silent prayer, while to his left, Alderman Bertnoth of Essex leaned forward, his knuckles white on the arm of his chair. Ælfthryth's entrance silenced the room. All eyes followed her as she glided across the rush-strewn floor, the hem of her deep blue gown whispering against the reeds. She did not take a seat beside Edward, but stood before the dais, a queen claiming her battlefield. "Mother," Edward began, his voice strained, "we await your counsel. Ordgar's treachery is but the first thread in a larger tapestry of deceit," Ælfthryth finished, her tone cutting through the uneasy silence. She scanned the faces before her, nobles who had feasted at Edgar's table, sworn oaths on holy relics, yet now shifted like sand. "My nephew Ælfthryth lies broken in body and spirit. The snake who took him wears Ordgar's colors, but he did not act alone. This conspiracy seeks to tear the crown from Edward's head and place it on a puppet's brow." Her gaze settled on Alderman Ælfthryth of Mercia, a man whose ambition was as notorious as his cruelty. He met her eyes, unblinking, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "You think yourself safe behind your Mercian walls," she thought, "but I will peel back your arrogance like rotten bark." Bertnoth cleared his throat. "Queen Ælfthryth, we grieve for the boy. But Orgar is one man. Must we so panic? Let the law take its course, trial by ordeal, judgment by the Whitlan." Law. Ælfthryth's laugh was a sharp, brittle sound. "When my son Athelred was but 5 winters old, he saw a monster in the garden, a man with a serpent coiled upon his cloak. That monster was Orgar. Law did not stop him from stealing a child in the night. Law will not root out the poison festering in this kingdom." She turned to Edward, her voice softening, though her eyes remained flint. "You are king, Edward. But kingship is not parchment and seals. It is blood and bone. It is the will to strike before the serpent strikes you." Edward's hands clenched on the arms of the throne. "I will not rule through terror, mother. Orgar will answer for his crimes, but I will not see England drown in suspicion." Before Ælfthryth could reply, the hall doors burst open. Captain Wulfstan strode in, his mail shirt spattered with mud, dragging a gaunt, hooded figure. Gasps rippled through the assembly as Wulfstan threw back the hood, revealing Orgar. The alderman's face was ashen, his fine tunic torn, but his eyes burned with defiance. Wulfstan bowed. "My queen, my king." He spoke before dawn. "Names." He handed Ælfthryth a scrap of vellum. She unfolded it slowly, the scratch of quill ink stark in the candlelight. 3 names. Ælfhere, Edric of Kent, Wulfstan of York. A cold fury settled in her chest. She raised her eyes, locking onto Ælfhere. "Alderman Ælfhere, you plotted with Orgar to kidnap my kin, to weaken Edward's throne, to pave the way for your own ambition." The accusation hung in the air, thick as smoke. Ælfhere surged to his feet. "Lies. Spun by a traitor seeking to save his own skin. I demand trial by combat." "You demand nothing." Ælfthryth's voice was a whip crack. "Wulfstan, seize him." Guards moved swiftly, pinioning Ælfhere's arms. He spat curses, but Ælfthryth ignored him, turning to the others. "Edric of Kent, Wulfstan of York, you are stripped of lands and titles. Surrender now, or be hunted like beasts." Panic erupted. Thane scrambled back, benches toppling. Edward rose, pale but resolute. "Mother, this is too swift. We must act." Ælfthryth whirled on him, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper only he could hear. "Mercy is a luxury, Edward. A king who cannot kill cannot rule. They would slit your throat as you slept. They would sell your crown to the Danes." She placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tremor beneath his sleeve. "Your father knew this. He trusted me to be the blade he could not wield openly. Trust me now." Edward stared at her, the weight of the crown suddenly visible in the shadows beneath his eyes. In that moment, he was not a king but a boy confronting the monstrous truth of his inheritance. Ælfthryth's heart ached. "I have made him see the world as I do, a place of knives and shadows," but she hardened herself. "Captain," she commanded, her voice ringing clear again, "take these traitors to the dungeons. At dawn, Orgar and Ælfhere will face execution. Let the manner of it remind all England what becomes of those who threaten the king's blood." As the guards dragged the struggling nobles away, the hall emptied, leaving only Ælfthryth and Edward amidst the wreckage of overturned cups and scattered rushes. Outside, the first gray light of dawn seeped through the high windows. Edward sank back onto the throne, his shoulders slumped. "They will call you a monster," he murmured. Not looking at her, Ælfthryth stepped closer, lifting his chin with a gentle finger. "Let them. When you hold your own son in your arms one day, you will understand. A mother's love is a quiet thing until it becomes a roar." She kissed his forehead, the salt of his unshed tears on her lips. "Rest now. The sun rises on a safer kingdom." But as she turned to leave, the image of Edric's hollow eyes flashed before her. Safer, she thought, but never safe. The path ahead was drenched in blood, and she would walk it without flinching for Ælfthryth, for England, for the terrible, beautiful burden of motherhood in a world where love and power were two edges of the same sword. The scent of damp earth and decay clung to the stones of Corf's great hall long after Ordgar's head had been separated from his body. The execution at dawn had been a public spectacle, a grim punctuation mark to Ælfthryth's declaration of power. Ordgar's final moments, spent spitting curses rather than prayers into the gray morning light, had silenced the gathered crowd of villagers and lesser nobles. His body now lay in an unmarked pit beyond the castle walls, a feast for crows. Ælfthryth, the powerful alderman of Mercia named by Ordgar in his desperate, final confession, was less easily dispatched. News of his arrest, carried by hard-riding messengers, would be rippling through the kingdom like a stone cast into a still pond, stirring currents of fear and resentment among those who owed him fealty or shared his ambitions. The air in the hall was thick, not just with wood smoke and the lingering metallic tang of blood from the courtyard, but with the unspoken dread of what Ælfthryth's capture, or defiance, might unleash. Ælfthryth sat near the high table, not upon the dais where Edward presided with a face like carved alabaster, but slightly apart. She nursed a cup of warmed, spiced wine, its feeble heat doing little to thaw the cold knot of exhaustion in her chest. Her gaze drifted to the far corner where Ælfthryth sat, a fragile figure wrapped in a heavy woolen shawl. Edric was curled beside her on a bench, his small body pressed tightly against his mother's side. He hadn't spoken since his return, flinching at sudden movements, his wide eyes haunted. The vibrant boy who had chased butterflies in the castle gardens seemed buried beneath layers of terror. Ælfthryth's hand trembled as she stroked his hair, her own face etched with a grief deeper than mere sorrow. It was the look of a woman who had glimpsed the abyss and knew its shadow would forever linger on her child. "Mother." The voice, thin and uncertain, pulled Ælfthryth back. Ælfthryth stood before her, his nurse hovering anxiously a few steps behind. At 8 summers, he possessed Edgar's fair hair and clear blue eyes, but none of the late king's imposing presence yet. His face was pale, pinched with worry that seemed too old for his years. Is the bad man truly gone? The one with the snake? Ælfthryth set her cup down and opened her arms. He scrambled onto her lap, burying his face in the rich velvet of her gown, seeking the familiar scent of lavender and beeswax. "He is gone, my little king," she murmured, holding him close, feeling the frantic beat of his heart against her own. "The monster who frightened you will never harm anyone again. I promise." Her voice was steady, soothing, a stark contrast to the ruthless command she'd issued only hours before. The duality was a constant ache. How much does he sense? Does he hear the whispers about the headsman's axe? Does he know his mother ordered it? She kissed the top of his head, breathing in the childish scent of soap and innocence she was determined to shield. "You are safe. Edric is safe. All is well." "But Edward looks angry," Ælfthryth whispered, peeking towards the dais where his half-brother sat stiffly, listening to a report from a dust-streaked rider. The young king's knuckles were white where they gripped the arms of his chair. "He carries the weight of the kingdom, my love," Ælfthryth said, smoothing his hair. "It is a heavy burden, but he is strong, and we are here to help him bear it." The light tasted bitter. Edward's anger was palpable, radiating across the hall like heat from a forge. He hadn't met her eyes since she'd overruled his plea for Ordgar's imprisonment over execution. Her lesson in kingship had been brutal, and its consequences were only beginning. On the dais, Edward finally dismissed the rider with a curt nod. He rose abruptly, the scrape of his chair loud in the subdued hall. His gaze swept the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Ælfthryth and Ælfthryth, before landing on Ælfthryth and Edric. A flicker of something guilt, pity, crossed his features before hardening into regal resolve. "Mother," he called, his voice tight. A word. In the solar. Now. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Turning on his heel and striding towards the private chamber adjoining the hall. Ælfthryth gently disentangled Æthelred, handing him back to his nurse. "Stay with your aunt, sweetheart. Comfort Edric if you can." She approached Æthelflaed, kneeling briefly beside her sister. "How is he?" Æthelflaed's eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, lifted. "He sleeps sometimes. Then he wakes screaming about the dark and the cold and the snake." Her voice cracked. "They broke him, THRYTH. That sweet boy, they broke something inside him. They will pay." Ælfthryth vowed, her own voice low and fierce. She touched Æthelflaed's cold hand. "Ordgar paid. Ælfhere will pay. Every one of them. I swear it on Edgar's soul." She saw the flicker of doubt in her sister's eyes, the unspoken question, "At what cost?" Ælfthryth squeezed her hand. "Hold him close. The shadows cannot touch him here, not while I draw breath." She rose, squaring her shoulders, the comforting mother replaced by the steel-willed queen regnant. She walked towards the solar, the weight of Edward's summons settling heavily upon her. The solar was warmer, the fire crackling fiercely in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the tapestries depicting hunting scenes, scenes of life, not death. Edward stood before the flames, his back rigid. He didn't turn as she entered and closed the heavy oak door. "That was reckless, mother." His voice was clipped, devoid of the deference he usually showed, at least in public. "Ælfhere is no minor landowner. He commands the loyalty of half of Mercia, men with swords and shields and grudges." Ælfthryth moved to stand beside him, gazing into the flames. "Ordgar commanded loyalty too. Loyalty bought with promises against your throne, Edward, against your brother's future, against me." She turned her head to look at his profile, sharp in the firelight. "He named Ælfhere as his co-conspirator. What would you have me do? Invite him to supper to discuss his grievances? I would have you consider the consequences." Edward whirled to face her, his young face contorted with frustration. "You executed Ordgar without trial, without allowing the Witan to judge him. You ordered the arrest of one of the most powerful ealdormen in England on the word of a dying traitor. Do you think his thanes will simply lay down their arms? Do you think the other nobles sleep soundly tonight, knowing the Queen Dowager can have them seized on suspicion?" His voice rose. "You act as if you wield the crown. It sits upon my head." The words hung in the air, charged and dangerous. Ælfthryth didn't flinch. She met his anger with icy calm. "And who placed it there, Edward? Who ensured the Witan confirmed you as king after your father's death? Who smoothed the brows of the doubtful? Who countered the whispers that perhaps a child of Edgar's true queen?" She let the implication hang. "Might have a stronger claim?" She took a step closer. "That crown is heavy, yes, but it is also fragile. It requires more than just wearing it. It demands defending, relentlessly. Ordgar sought to undermine you, to use my son, your brother, as a pawn to fracture your support. Ælfhere likely funded it, or at least sanctioned it, waiting in the wings to pick up the pieces. Mercy now is weakness. Weakness invites the wolves." Her gaze bored into his. "You spoke of consequences. The consequence of inaction is civil war. The consequence of hesitation is your throne, and likely your life, forfeit. Do you understand that now?" Edward stared back, conflict warring in his eyes, the ingrained piety and desire for just rule instilled by Dunstan, the archbishop, battling against the harsh political realities Ælfthryth embodied. Dunstan would counsel prayer and counsel, not summary execution and arrest. "Dunstan counsels for the salvation of souls," Ælfthryth retorted, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "I counsel for the survival of this kingdom and your place in it. The world is not a cloister, Edward. It is a battlefield. Men like Ordgar and Ælfhere do not respond to prayers. They respond only to strength, unflinching strength." She saw him waver, the righteous anger giving way to a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. You are king, but you are young. Your father entrusted me to guide you, to protect your interests until you could wield power fully. That is what I am doing, even when it stains my hands." She held up her hands, pale and ringed, towards the firelight. "So you can keep yours clean for the chronicles." He looked away, his jaw working. The silence stretched, filled only by the pop and hiss of the fire. Finally, he spoke, his voice weary. "Messengers arrived. From Winchester, and from Tamworth, near Ælfthyr's seat. Ælfthryth's senses sharpened, and Winchester is uneasy. Bishop Athelwold sends cautious greetings, but expresses concern over the abrupt removal of Ordgar. He urges moderation and due process." Edward's tone was flat. "The message from Tamworth is worse. Ælfthyr's son, Ælfric, has rallied his father's hearth guards. They've fortified the manor. The messenger barely escaped. He says banners are being raised. They cry vengeance for Ælfthyr's unlawful seizure, and—" He hesitated. "They name you as the instigator. A monstrous mother grasping for power through her child." The words landed like physical blows, confirming her fears yet sparking a cold fury. Monstrous Mother. The label, flung by enemies, echoed the secret fears that sometimes haunted her own sleepless nights. Was this the price of protecting Athelred? To be forever branded a she-wolf? She forced her expression to remain impassive. "So, the viper's nest stirs. Ælfric is a hot-headed fool, but he commands swords. How many? 200, perhaps 300 seasoned men. More could flock to his banner if he claims injustice." Edward ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying his youth. "Dunstan urges me to go to Winchester, to show myself to the Witan, to reassure them, to project stability." "He's right," Ælfthryth said immediately, her mind racing. "You must go. Show strength, not fear. Address the bishops and the ealdormen. Assure them of your commitment to law and order. Remind them of Ordgar's confessed treason and Ælfthyr's alleged involvement. Emphasize the threat to your person to the realm's peace. Do not mention Athelred unless pressed. Frame it as a plot against you, the anointed king." She paused, a plan crystallizing. "And I will go to Tamworth." Edward's head snapped up. "What? Mother? No. It's too dangerous. Ælfric is unpredictable." "All the more reason," she interrupted. "He has declared against me. If I ride at the head of your troops, bearing your banner, it shows unity. It shows that an attack on the king's mother, the guardian of his heir, is an attack on the crown itself. My presence will undermine Ælfric's claim of injustice. It paints him as a rebel attacking royal authority." She saw the doubt in his eyes. "Edward, trust me in this. While you soothe the Witan, I will crush this rebellion in its cradle. Swiftly, decisively, before it can spread like rot." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch firm. "We act together, you and I. For the kingdom." He searched her face, looking for the mother, finding only the unwavering resolve of the queen. After a long moment, he gave a curt nod, the weight of kingship settling more heavily on his young shoulders. "Very well. Take Captain Wulfstan and the household guard. And be careful. Care is for the weak," Ælfthryth said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, devoid of warmth. "I go to show them the consequence of defiance." She turned towards the door, her mind already shifting to logistics. "Messengers, armor." As her hand touched the cold iron latch, Edward's voice stopped her. "Mother." He sounded young again, uncertain. "They call you monstrous. For Ethelred's sake, is it worth it?" "The cost." Ælfthryth didn't turn back. The image of Edric's vacant eyes, of Ethelred's terrified question about the snake monster, flashed before her. The whispers of Ælfric's defiance echoed. "Everything has a cost, Edward," she said, her voice low and steady, carrying the weight of stone. "The cost of failure is infinitely higher." She opened the door and stepped back into the hall, leaving the young king alone with the fire and the chilling certainty of her words. The path ahead was drenched in shadow, paved with the broken promises of traitors and the desperate love of a mother deemed monstrous. She would walk it, regardless of the cost, shielding her son with her own body, her own reputation, her own soul if need be. The wolves were gathering. She would meet them with fire and iron. The morning dawned gray and heavy, the scent of damp earth and wood smoke clinging to the stones of Corf like a shroud. Ælfthryth stood at the narrow window of the keep's solar, her knuckles white where they gripped the cold stone sill. Below, the bailey churned with activity, the clang of the smithy, the shouts of men drilling under Captain Wulfston's barked commands, the nervous whinny of horses being readied. Each sound was a hammer blow against the fragile peace she had fought so hard to impose. Ordgar's blood had barely dried on the executioner's block. Ælfhere languished in the deepest oubliette, and already the vipers stirred anew. Ælfric, Ælfhere's whelp, had raised his father's banner, the snarling boar, over his manor at Sherburn, calling her a monstrous mother, a usurper, a poisoner of the realm. The words, carried by fleeing servants and terrified monks, echoed in her skull. Monstrous. Was protecting her child monstrous? Was ensuring the rightful heir, or Æthelred, born of Edgar's sacred marriage, sat upon the throne, truly an act of evil? She closed her eyes, the image of Edward's pale, disapproving face as Ordgar's head fell superimposing itself over the bustling courtyard. He had ridden out at first light for Winchester, Bishop Ethelwald's hand heavy on his shoulder, urging reconciliation, urging the king to distance himself from her harsh justice. Foolish boy. Soft-hearted fool. Edward thought kingship was prayer and piety. He hadn't learned, truly learned, the lesson she'd tried to teach him in the dungeon's fetid dark. Power was not given, it was seized, held with bloodied knuckles against the tide of envy and ambition. Mother. A small voice, hesitant, broke through the grim litany in her mind. She turned. Æthelred stood in the doorway, dwarfed by the heavy oak frame. His nurse, Ælfgiva, hovered anxiously behind him, her face pinched with worry. Ethelred's eyes were wide, the blue almost luminous against the pallor of his skin. He clutched a wooden knight, its paint chipped. Will there be fighting? Like the stories. Ælfthryth's heart clenched, a physical pain beneath the stiff brocade of her gown. She forced her features into calm, stepping away from the window, its view of grim preparation. Come here, little king. She knelt, the rushes scratching her knees, opening her arms. He ran to her, burying his face in the ritual of her dress. She could feel the slight tremor in his small frame. He smelled of sleep and warm bread. There may be some unpleasantness, my dove, she murmured into his soft hair, her voice low and steady, belying the turmoil within. Some foolish men forget their oaths. But Captain Wulfston and the brave guards are here. They will keep us safe. She pulled back, cupping his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. Remember, you are Edgar's son. You carry the blood of kings. Courage is your birthright. He nodded, his lip trembling slightly. But the snake man, he was scary. And Uncle Ælfhere, he was always grumpy. Ethelred's brow furrowed in childish confusion. Why do they want to hurt us? How to explain the labyrinthine paths of greed and thwarted ambition to a child? How to tell him his very existence was a threat to those who saw a weak king in Edward and a path to power through his removal? Because they fear strength, Æthelred, she said, choosing her words carefully, smoothing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. They fear a future where you sit where you belong. They seek to break us through fear. But we will not break. We stand together as family. She kissed his forehead, tasting salt. Go with Ælfgiva now. Practice your letters. Be brave for me. As Ælfgiva led him away, Æthelred looked back, his eyes holding hers for a long moment before disappearing into the corridor's gloom. The weight of his trust, his innocence, settled on her shoulders like lead. She rose, the momentary softness hardening into resolve. Monstrous? If that's the price for his crown, so be it. She found her sister in the smaller hall where Edric lay on a pallet near the hearth. Ethelflaed sat beside him, her face etched with lines of exhaustion and fear that hadn't been there a week ago. She held Edric's hand, her own trembling. The boy was asleep, but it was a restless, twitching slumber. Dark bruises circled his eyes, and even in sleep, his brow was furrowed, his breath catching in shallow gasps. He flinched when a log shifted loudly in the fire. "He barely speaks," Ælfthryth whispered, her voice raw. She didn't look up. He waked screaming. About the dark, about hands grabbing him, about the snake on the cloak. Her fingers tightened around Edric's. He saw Ælfthryth. He saw who took him. The terror, it's etched into his soul. Ælfthryth moved silently to stand beside her sister, looking down at her nephew's ravaged face. A fierce, protective fury burned cold in her chest. Ordgar's death had been too swift, too clean. Ælfthyr's imprisonment too comfortable. "He is safe now, sister," she said, her voice low but carrying the steel of conviction. "He is under my roof, guarded by men loyal to me. No one will touch him again." But for how long? Ælfthryth finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears and a desperate anger. "Alfred calls you a monster. He gathers men. They whisper it in the villages, that you murdered Edward's mother to wed Edgar, that you orchestrated young Edward's accident at Corfe years ago, that you poisoned Edgar himself, that you are a witch who consumes children. They blame you for Orgar, for Ælfthyr, and now they come." Her voice rose, trembling. "How long before they storm these walls? How long before Edric is snatched again? Or worse? Or Ælfthryth?" The last name was a choked sob. Ælfthryth knelt beside Ælfthryth, gripping her sister's free hand. It was ice cold. "Listen to me, Ælfthryth," she commanded, her gaze locking onto her sister's terrified one. "The whispers? They are the wind howling through rotten trees. Ælfric is a pup yapping at the heels of a wolfhound. He thinks rebellion is a game played with banners and boasts. He has no idea what he has unleashed." Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "They call me monstrous? Good. Let them fear the monster. Fear keeps men in line. Fear protects what is ours. I did not claw my way from the daughter of a Devon thane to Queen of England only to see my son's birthright stolen by the spawn of treacherous curs like Ælfthyr." She squeezed Ælfthryth's hand until her sister winced. "Edric will recover. He will grow strong. And I will crush Ælfric beneath my heel. His head will join his father's as a warning to any who dare threaten my blood." Ælfthryth stared at her, a flicker of awe warring with the terror in her eyes. "But Edward, the Witan, they may not stand with you." Athelwold counsels peace. "Edward is learning," Ælfthryth cut in, rising to her feet, her posture regal, unyielding. "He is in Winchester, playing the pious king, hoping Ethelwold's honeyed words will soothe the beast. It won't. Ælfric and his ilk smell weakness. They need to smell blood. My blood. And they will choke on it." She looked towards the door where Captain Wulfstan now stood, waiting silently, his face grim. "Peace is a luxury afforded to the secure, sister. We are not secure. Not yet. Prepare yourself. I ride for Sherburne at noon." Wulfstan stepped forward as Ælfthryth approached. "My queen, the men are ready. 50 seasoned fighters, mounted. Scouts report Ælfric has perhaps 200, mostly levy. Poorly armed. He holds the manor house at Sherburne, but the village is nervous. Some men slipped away last night. 200 frightened peasants led by a boy playing at warlord," Ælfthryth said, a cold smile touching her lips. "Good. We move fast. We show strength. We offer one chance for surrender." Her eyes, hard as flint, met Wulfstan's. "Only one. If they refuse, make an example. Let Sherburne burn if it must. Let the smoke carry the message across Wessex, defiance of the crown, threats against the queen and her kin, and only in ashes and severed heads. Is that understood, Captain?" Wulfstan, a veteran of Edgar's wars, a man who had seen the worst of men, swallowed hard. There was no mercy in her eyes, only the implacable will of a mother protecting her cub. He saw the shadow of the monster Ælfric railed against, and in that moment he feared her more than any Saxon shield wall. "Understood, your grace. It will be done." As he turned to leave, Ælfthryth called after him, her voice ringing in the suddenly silent hall. "In Wulfstan? Bring me Ælfric. Alive. I have words for the pup before he meets his father in hell." She watched him go, then turned her gaze back to the fire, its flames dancing like the rebellion she intended to extinguish. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning around the towers of Corfe. It sounded like the voices of the dead, whispering warnings, or perhaps, just maybe, whispering approval. She touched the small silver cross at her throat, a habitual gesture devoid of warmth. "Judge me not, Lord, until you have walked a mile in my shoes, carrying the weight of a kingdom and a son's fragile future." Monstrous? Perhaps. But the world that birthed her demanded monsters, and she would be the most terrifying one of all. The ride to Sherburne awaited, a path paved not with cobbles, but with the cold, hard necessity of survival. The monstrous mother was going to war. Let Ælfric tremble. The rain began as Ælfthryth's retinue climbed the chalk hills west of Corfe, a cold, relentless drizzle that seeped through wool cloaks and turned the ancient track to slurry. Mud clung to the hooves of her palfrey, the beast snorting clouds of steam into the damp air. Around her, 200 men marched, housecarls and ring mail, their shields slung across backs, and levy spearmen with faces hardened by harvest and hardship. Captain Wulfstan rode at her flank, his eyes scanning the tree-line of the looming Purbeck woods. "Bad footing for a charge, my queen," he muttered, wiping rain from his beard. Ælfric chose his ground well. Ælfthryth tightened her grip on the reins. Sherburne lay 30 miles northwest, but every mile felt like a league under the iron-gray sky. She could still feel Ethelred's small hands clutching her neck that morning, his whisper hot against her ear. "Don't let the snake man get me, Mama." The memory was a knife twist. Her son's terror, Edric's hollow stare in the torchlight, these were the costs of Ordgar's scheming, now amplified by Ælfric's rebellion. She had kissed Ethelred's forehead, promising monsters only lived in stories. A lie. She carried theirs in her wake. "Speed is our ally, Wulfstan," she replied, her voice cutting through the drumming rain. "Ælfric expects us to cower behind Corfe's walls. Let him savor his hubris." She nudged her horse forward, the sodden banner of Wessex, a golden dragon frayed at the edges, flapping weakly overhead. "He calls me monstrous," she thought, the accusation echoing in her mind like a bell. Ælfric's messengers had scattered their poison across the shires, broadsheets nailed to church doors, declaring her a child-snatching witch who'd butchered honest men for her bastard's ambition. Let them talk. She'd seen true monstrosity, Ordgar's smirk as Edric wept, the gleam in Ælfir's eyes when he plotted Edward's fall. Mothers who hesitated buried their children. Hers would wear a crown. By dusk, the column reached the vale where the River Yeo coiled like a tarnished ribbon. Sherburne's abbey towers pierced the gloom ahead, but between them and sanctuary sprawled Ælfric's host. Campfires glittered like fallen stars on the opposite ridge, 1,000 men at least. Their own dragon banner defiant against the murk. Among them, Ælfthryth knew, were thanes whose fathers had served Edgar, their loyalty eroded by her ruthlessness, and peasants with scythes and hunting bows, fed lies about a queen who starved the poor to gild her nursery. Wulfstan reined in beside her. He holds the high ground. Forced the townsfolk into the abbey for defense or hostages. We're outnumbered 3-1. His hand rested on his sword hilt, knuckles white. A night assault, under cover of this mire, and charge uphill into spears. Ælfthryth shook her head, rainwater sluicing from her hood. "No, we make him come to us. Here." She pointed to the water meadows flanking the river. "Flooded fields. His cavalry will founder in the mud." A young spearman nearby, barely 16, with a downy chin, stumbled over a tussock, his worn boots sucking at the muck. Ælfthryth caught his arm before he fell. "Steady, boy. What's your name?" "Osric, my lady." he stammered, eyes wide as he recognized her. She pressed a silver penny into his palm, cold and sharp. For courage, Osric. When the shield wall forms, stand left of Wulfstan. His axes felled wolves. It will shelter you. The boy clutched the coin like a relic, nodding mutely. Wulfstan's gaze met hers, unspoken approval in the tilt of his brow. A queen who noticed a muddy peasant lad could inspire more than fear. They made camp in a copse of wind-stunted oaks. As men huddled under oiled hides, Ælfthryth walked among them. She tasted the thin barley broth from a cooking pot, listened to a graybeard's complaint about leaky tents, and knelt to bless a rosary for a man whose wife labored with their first child back in Wareham. "Your babe will know his father fought for the true king," she promised, pressing the wooden beads back into his calloused hand. His tears mingled with the rain. This is the clay of kingdoms, she thought. Loyalty bought not just with gold, but with remembered names and shared hardship. Later, in her campaign tent, a drafty space smelling of wet wool and beeswax, she dictated a letter to a scribe. To Edward, King of the English, in Winchester. Greetings, Ælfric rebels. Hold Sherburne with 1,000 swords. We engage at dawn. Send Alderman Bertnoth's FYRD from London. Speed is life. She sealed it with her ring, the amethyst intaglio cold against her thumb. Ride hard, she told the messenger. If captured, eat the parchment. Alone at last, she sank onto a folding stool. The tent flap rustled. Ælfthryth stood there, travel-stained and grim. "You shouldn't have come," Ælfthryth said, rising swiftly. "Edric needs you." "Edric sleeps." The physician gave him poppy milk. Ælfthryth's voice was raw. "And I need to see the man who ordered him starved in that pit." She touched the seeks at her belt, its bone handle worn smooth. "You think me too gentle for war, sister? I gutted my firstborn at 12. Ælfthryth embraced her, feeling the tremble beneath her sister's resolve. "Ælfric dies tomorrow, but not by your hand. I won't have his blood on your soul. He threatened my child, Tryth. Ælfthryth pulled back, eyes blazing. "When the time comes, promise me. No quick sword stroke. Let him feel it." Before Ælfthryth could answer, shouts erupted outside. Wulfstan burst in, rain slicked and breathless. Scouts report movement. Ælfric sends an envoy, under truce banner. Dawn bled pale light through the clouds as Ælfthryth rode to the riverbank, flanked by Wulfstan and 10 housecarls. Across the swollen current, 3 horsemen waited. At their head sat Ælfric. He wore his father's byrnie, the mail gleaming like fish scales under a wolfskin cloak. At 25, he had Ælfhere's hawk nose and cold eyes, but none of the old alderman's cunning. His gaze swept over Ælfthryth with open contempt. "Queen Dowager," he called, voice carrying over the rush of water. "Or should I say regicide?" Wulfstan growled, but Ælfthryth raised a gloved hand. "Speak your peace, traitor. My son's breakfast grows cold." Ælfric's smile was a knife cut. "Your bastard, you mean. Edward is king by law and blood. Yet you poisoned nobles who honored him. Stole lands for your whelp." "I executed murderers," she interrupted, icy calm. "Men who kidnapped a child of royal blood to start a war. Your father among them. My father defended the realm from you." Spittle flew from Ælfric's lips. "A woman who burns loyal thanes alive to frighten boys. They whisper it in every mead hall. Ælfthryth the Monstrous Mother. Will you roast me too? Or will you spare Wessex the carnage?" He leaned forward, gripping his saddle horn. "Renounce Ethelred's claim. Disinherit him. Then take the veil at Shaftesbury, and I'll spare your army. Refuse." He gestured to the abbey's distant towers. "And I hang a Sherburne child from the walls every hour until you kneel." Silence hung, thick as the river mist. Ælfthryth felt Wulfstan tense beside her, saw the housecarls' knuckles whiten on their spears. Inside, a cold fury crystallized. She had played this game since Edgar's death, threats wrapped in silk, bribes veiled as piety. But this? Child killing as strategy? The monster they named her stirred, hot and hungry. She urged her horse knee-deep into the icy water, ignoring the gasp of her men. The current tugged at her mount's legs, but she held steady, her stare locking with Ælfrith's across the foam. "You mistake me, boy," she said, her voice low yet carrying like a bell. "You speak of monsters? I birthed one." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Ælfrith's face. "Not Æthelred. Me." She drew her eating knife, a slender thing, but sharp, and held it aloft. "Lay one hand on a Sherburn child, and I swear by the wounds of Christ, I will carve your still beating heart from your chest and feed it to my dogs. Your father died screaming for mercy he did not deserve. You will beg for death long before I grant it." She sheathed the blade. "Now, you have until noon to surrender, or I will come across this river and show Wessex what a monstrous mother truly does to those who threaten her children." Wheeling her horse, she rode back to camp without a backward glance. Behind her, Ælfrith's enraged shout echoed off the hills, swallowed by the rain and the rising wind. The die was cast. Dawn would bring blood, and Ælfthryth would wade through it, a queen forged in fury, ready to drown the world to save her son. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the fields outside Sherburn into a churning sea of mud. Ælfthryth stood atop a low rise, her cloak heavy with water, the wool clinging to her like a second skin. Below, in the valley, Ælfrith's rebel forces had formed a ragged shield wall, their banners, a snarling boar on a field of green, sagging under the downpour. Her own men, loyal to the crown and to her son's claim, stood in tighter ranks, their shields locked, spears bristling like the quills of a hedgehog. The air thrummed with tension, thick with the smell of wet earth, iron, and the sour tang of fear. Ælfthryth's fingers tightened on the hilt of the Sikhs at her belt. "Monstrous Mother," Ælfrith had called her. The words echoed in her skull, mingling with the drumming rain. She had embraced the title when she ordered Ordgar's execution, when she tore the conspirators from their beds. But now, facing the consequence, a field of Englishmen ready to slaughter one another for the whim of ambition, doubt not at her. "Is this the only way?" she thought, watching a raven circle overhead, its croak lost in the wind. To drown the kingdom in blood so Æthelred might sit a dry throne? Beside her, Æthelflaed shivered, her face pale as bone. "Sister," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Edric," he woke screaming again. He said the snake man was in his dreams. Ælfthryth did not turn. Her eyes remained fixed on the rebel lines. "The snake man is dead, Æthelflaed. Ordgar rots in the earth. This," she gestured at the field, "is the last gasp of his poison. But at what cost?" Æthelflaed's hand brushed Ælfthryth's arm, a fleeting touch. "Must children pay for the sins of men? Edric is broken, and Æthelred is king." Ælfthryth snapped, the words sharper than she intended. She softened her tone, though her gaze stayed hard. "Or he will be. If I falter now, sister, they will tear him from my arms. They will call him bastard, usurper. They will slit his throat in his sleep." She thought of her boy, safe in Corv's stone embrace, playing with wooden knights. "Innocence is a luxury," she told herself, "when I cannot afford." A horn blasted from the rebel lines, a deep, mournful sound that cut through the rain. Ælfric himself rode forward on a chestnut stallion, flanked by 2 armored riders. He raised a hand, demanding parley. Ælfrith nodded to Captain Wulfstan. "With me." Wulfstan, his face a mask of old scars and grim resolve, fell in step beside her as she descended the slope. The mud sucked at her boots, thick and cold. Ælfthryth met her halfway, his horse stamping impatiently. Rain plastered his graying hair to his forehead, and his eyes burned with a fury that mirrored her own. "Queen Dowager," he called, his voice dripping with scorn. "Still playing the she-wolf? Surrender now. Renounce Ethelred's claim. Send the boy to a monastery, and I will spare your life. Edward is king, let it stand." Ælfthryth halted, her guards forming a half-circle behind her. She did not shout. Her voice, when it came, was low, carrying on the wind like a blade drawn from leather. "You dare speak of sparing lives, Ælfthryth? After you took up arms against your king? After your father plotted murder in the shadows?" She took a step closer, ignoring the flinch of his horse. "Your rebellion ends here. Lay down your arms. Swear fealty to Edward and to Ethelred as his heir, or I will root you out like the traitor you are." Ælfthryth spat into the mud. "Ethelred is a puppet on your strings. You think the Witan will accept a child king shaped by a woman they call monster?" He leaned forward, his knuckles white on the reins. "Your reign of terror ends today, witch. My men outnumber yours. They are hungry for justice." "Justice?" Ælfthryth laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Your father died justly. He confessed. And you? You are but a boy throwing stones at a fortress." She raised her voice, letting it ring out so both armies might hear. "Hear me, men of Wessex. Ælfric, son of Ælfhere, rebels not for justice, but for vengeance. He would plunge this kingdom into civil war while Danes lick their chops on our shores. I stand for the crown for Edward, anointed king, for Ethelred, his blood heir, and for the peace Edgar built." A murmur rippled through her own ranks. Shields thumped in approval. Ælfric's face darkened. "Peace? You speak of peace while you drown us in blood. You chose blood," Ælfthryth hissed. "Now reap it." She turned to Wulfstan. "Captain, if a single child is harmed in this fight, if one hair on Edric's head is threatened again, I will burn every hall, every field, every stone of Ælfric's lands. Make sure your men know it." Wulfstan's jaw tightened. My queen." Ælfric wheeled his horse, shouting to his men, "For my father's honor. For England." The rebel horn blared again, and the shield wall lurched forward, a slow, grinding advance through the mud. Ælfthryth climbed back to the rise, Ethelflaed clinging to her arm. "Sister, please," Ethelflaed begged, tears mixing with rain. "Must it be this way? Can we not?" "Watch," Ælfthryth commanded, her voice steel. "Watch what happens to those who threaten our blood." The battle began not with a roar, but with a sickening crunch, 100 shields colliding, with splintering, men screaming as spears punched through mail. Ælfthryth's archers loosed volleys from the flanks, arrows hissing like vipers. Men fell, writhing in the muck. She saw Wulfstan in the thick of it, his axe rising and falling, a red spray arcing with every swing. "This is my doing," she thought, cold spreading through her chest. "Every drop of blood is on my hands." Ælfric fought like a demon, rallying his men, his boar banner thrusting forward. He broke through a weak point in Ælfthryth's line, carving a path toward the rise, toward her. Wulfstan saw it. With a bellow, the captain charged, his housecarls at his heels. They met Ælfric in a whirlwind of steel. Ælfthryth did not blink. She watched as Wulfstan's axe slammed into Ælfric's shield, splitting it. Watched as Ælfric's sword found a gap in Wulfstan's armor, sinking deep into his side. The captain staggered, but did not fall. With a roar that shook the field, he brought his axe down in a final, terrible arc. It cleaved Ælfric's helmet, splitting skull and brain. The rebel lord crumpled. His banner wavered, then toppled into the mud. A great wail went up from his men. Leaderless, their resolve shattered. They broke, fleeing into the rain-choked woods. Victory, but the cost. Wulfstan lay on his back, blood pooling beneath him, staining the earth black. Ælfthryth rushed to him, Ethelflaed at her heels. She knelt, cradling the old warrior's head. His breath came in wet, ragged gasps. "My queen." He choked, blood bubbling at his lips. "Done," as you commanded." "You fool," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You loyal, brave fool." He managed a ghastly smile. "Athelred, keep him safe. Make him better than us." His eyes glazed, fixed on the weeping sky. Ælfthryth closed his eyelids with a trembling hand. Around her, the groans of the wounded rose like a dirge. Ethelflaed sobbed openly, her face buried in her hands. "Captain Wulfstan is dead," Ælfthryth announced, her voice hollow. "But the traitor Ælfric is slain. The rebellion is broken." She stood, wiping mud and blood from her palms. "Gather the wounded, burn the dead, and bring me Ælfric's head." A young soldier blanched. "My queen." "Bring it," she snarled. "Let it ride on a pike to Winchester. Let Edward see it. Let the Wittons see it. Let every man who dreams of treason see the fate that awaits them." As soldiers moved to obey, Ethelflaed grabbed her sister's arm. "Ælfthryth, this is madness. You speak of heads on pikes while children weep. When does it end?" Ælfthryth turned, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "It ends when my son is safe on his throne. It ends when no snake dares slither from the shadows to strike at him." She cupped Ethelflaed's tear-streaked face. "I am what they made me, sister. Monstrous? Perhaps. But I will be that monster if it shields the ones I love." She looked out over the field, the broken bodies, the crimson mud, the ravens already descending. The price of a crown. And she knew in her marrow that the bloodshed had only just begun. Edward would hear of this. The Witton would tremble. And Athelred, her sweet, fragile boy, he would inherit a kingdom forged in fire. "Let history call me monster," she thought, watching Ælfric's head lifted on a spear. "But let my son live." The rain fell harder, washing nothing clean. The rain had finally ceased, leaving Sherborne a churned wasteland of mud, blood, and broken men. Ælfthryth stood atop a slight rise, her cloak heavy with damp, the metallic tang of slaughter thick in her throat. Below, her men moved like ghosts through the mist, stripping the dead, tending the groaning wounded, and piling the enemy slain. Ælfric's head, pale and sightless, already stared blankly from a pike near the shattered remnants of his standard. The message was clear: challenge the Queen Mother at your peril. Victory. It tasted like ash. Captain Wulfstan, loyal and steadfast, lay cold beneath a rough shroud nearby. And the cost wasn't only counted in the dead. Turning from the grim vista, Ælfthryth walked towards her command tent, her steps leaden. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs, blood, and despair. Ethelflaed knelt beside a low cot, her back rigid, her hands clasping one of Edric's. The boy lay unnaturally still, eyes wide open but seeing nothing of the canvas above him. A healer hovered nearby, uselessly wringing a cloth. "Sister," Ælfthryth said, her voice raspy from shouting orders and battle cries. Ethelflaed didn't turn. Her voice, when it came, was a brittle whisper. "Look at him. What have you made him see? What have you done to my son?" Ælfthryth approached the cot. Edric flinched minutely at her shadow. "I saved his life," she stated, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. "Ælfric would have used him, broken him utterly, as a pawn against us all." "Saved him." Ethelflaed finally looked up, her eyes raw and accusing. "He watched men butchered. He saw Captain Wulfstan fall. He sees snakes in every shadow now." "Ælfthryth, is this salvation? He is a husk." Her composure cracked, a sob escaping. "You promised protection. You brought him to a slaughterhouse." The accusation struck deep, piercing the Queen Mother's steely resolve. She knelt beside her sister, her own hand hovering over Edric's cold one before she dared to touch it. "Ethelflaed," she murmured, her voice low and urgent. "The world is a slaughterhouse. The wolves circle always. I fight them with the only weapons they understand, ruthlessness and strength. Would you rather he be a pawn in their game, or witness the price of defying us?" The horror he saw, "It is the shield I forge for Athelred, for all of us." Ethelflaed pulled Edric's hand away, clutching it to her chest. "At what cost to his soul? To yours?" They call you a monstrous mother, sister. Sometimes I fear they are right." The words hung in the air, a cold condemnation. Ælfthryth closed her eyes for a moment, the image of Ordgar's terrified face in the dungeon flashing behind her lids, the sound of Ælfric's neck breaking. When she opened them, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by the familiar, chilling resolve. Monstrous? Perhaps. But a lamb leads only to the slaughter. I will be the wolf that protects the den. Tend to your son, sister. He will recover. He is strong, like his mother. She stood, her gaze lingering on Edric's vacant stare. We ride for Corf at dawn. The king must be informed. Leaving the suffocating grief of the tent, Ælfthryth dictated terse messages. One rider galloped hard for Winchester, bearing news of the victory and Ælfric's fate for King Edward and the Witan. Another, carrying softer words scrawled in her own hand, raced towards Corf Castle. "My dearest Æthelred, the wolves are slain. I am safe. I come home to you. Be brave, my little king." Mother. The journey back to Dorset was a grim procession. The wounded slowed their pace, their moans a constant counterpoint to the rhythmic clop of hooves on the muddy track. Ælfthryth rode at the head, her face a mask, inwardly wrestling with Æthelflaed's words and the weight of the heads mounted on poles behind her, Ælfric's and his chief captains. She had embraced the monstrous title to cower enemies. Now she felt its icy fingers clawing at her own heart. Arrival at Corf Castle was a stark contrast to the battlefield. The sturdy gray walls promised sanctuary. As the gates creaked open, a small figure broke free from the cluster of waiting attendants and guards, darting across the courtyard with a cry. "Mother!" Æthelred flung himself at her before she could fully dismount. She caught him, the solid warmth of him a desperate anchor against the tide of recent horrors. She buried her face in his hair, breathing in the clean sin of boyhood, so alien after the stench of Sherburn. "My little king," she murmured, holding him tight. "I told you I would come home." He pulled back, his young face earnest, but clouded with something unfamiliar, a hesitant fear. His eyes, wide and searching, darted past her to the grim procession entering the gate, the wounded limping, the carts bearing shrouded bodies, the mounted heads drawing gasps and muttered prayers from the onlookers. "Mother," he began, his voice small. He looked up at her, his brow furrowed. "The servants, they whisper. They say you are a monster now, that you cut off men's heads and like it." His lower lip trembled slightly. Are you a monster?" The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Ælfthryth knelt, bringing herself level with her son. She cupped his face in her hands, her touch firm but gentle. She saw the innocence, the fear, the desperate need for reassurance. "Æthelred," she said, her voice low and steady, carrying only for him. "Look at me. Do you see a monster?" He searched her eyes, his own filled with confusion. "And no. But they whisper because they are afraid," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "Because the world is full of darkness, my son, and true monsters do walk in it. Men like Ælfric, who would steal your birthright, who would hurt your family, who would tear this kingdom apart." She glanced briefly towards the gruesome trophies. Then back to him. "What I am is your mother, and a queen, and I will do whatever must be done to keep you safe, to keep us safe, to make you king. That is not monstrous. That is love, a fierce love. Do you understand?" He stared at her, absorbing her words, the intensity in her eyes. Slowly, hesitantly, he nodded. "Fierce love," he repeated softly. "Yes, my little king. Fierce love." She pulled him close again, holding him fiercely against her travel-stained gown. Over his shoulder, her eyes lifted to the battlements of Corf. The setting sun cast long, jagged shadows. The peace was fragile, bought with blood and terror. Edward and Winchester, nobles whispering, sisters grieving, sons questioning. The wolves were never truly gone. They merely waited in the gathering dusk. She held Æthelred tighter, feeling the weight of the crown he would one day wear, a crown she would secure for him, no matter the cost, no matter the name they called her. The monstrous mother had won the battle, but the war for England's soul and her own was far from over. The shadows on the wall deepened, harboring unseen threats. Ælfthryth watched them, her embrace protective, her expression grimly resolute. The watch had only just begun. The damp stone walls of Corfe Castle seemed to close, and as Ælfthryth stood in the torchlit corridor, the echoes of her son's fearful voice still clinging to the air. "Are you truly a monster, mother?" Ethelred's question, whispered in the dimness of his chamber, had struck deeper than any rebel blade. She had soothed him, kneeling, clutching his small hands, swearing her violence was born of love. But the cost of that love now pressed upon her like a physical weight. Wulfstan's blood on Sherburn's field, Edric's hollow stare, and the specter of Ethelflaed's wrath loomed as large as the rebellion she'd crushed. She turned, her gown whispering against rushes strewn with herbs to mask the scent of damp and iron. A servant hovered, pale-faced. "My queen, your sister demands audience. She waits in the inner courtyard." Ælfthryth's jaw tightened. No title, no courtesy. Ethelflaed's rage had stripped even formalities bare. "Tell her I come." The courtyard, a sister's wrath. Ethelflaed stood like a storm-given form, her cloak sodden from the weeping sky. Edric huddled beside her, flinching as thunder growled. The boy's eyes, once bright with mischief, were vacant pools, a reflection of the battlefield horror Ælfthryth had forced him to witness. "You brought into a slaughter," Ethelflaed spat, voice raw. "My son, your own flesh, thrust into the maw of your ambition." Ælfthryth stepped forward, rain slicking her hair. "I brought him to safety. Ælfric's men would have dragged him from his bed had I left him undefended." "Safety?" Ethelflaed's laugh was a brittle shard. "He screams in the night, clawing at shadows. You used him as a pawn, just as you use Edward, just as you'll use Athelred." "Do not speak my son's name." Ælfthryth's composure cracked. "Every choice I make is to shield him from the vipers in this court. Would you rather Edric be orphaned by a traitor's dagger?" Ælfhere plotted to rip the crown from Edward's head and gut Ethelred's claim. "I ended that. Edric whimpered, burying his face in his mother's skirts. Ethelflaed gathered him close, tears mingling with rain. "At what cost, sister?" "Wulfstan lies cold." "And for what?" "A throne that may yet consume your boy." Ælfthryth reached out, but Ethelflaed recoiled. "Leave us. Your protection reeks of blood." The dismissal stung. Ælfthryth watched them retreat, Edric's slight form trembling. "I have saved him," she told herself. Why can they not see? The scriptorium, words as weapons. Alone in the scriptorium, Ælfthryth dictated a missive to Brother Godwin, the scribe's quill scratching like a beetle in the silence. "To his grace, King Edward," she began, voice stripped of emotion. "The rebellion at Sherburn is quelled. Ælfric of Mercia is slain. His head adorns the gates as a warning to traitors." She paused, the unspoken words thickening the air. "I did what you could not. I secured your throne." "Captain Wulfstan fell with honor," she continued. The memory of his body, arrow-pierced, flashing behind her eyes. His sacrifice ensures peace. The Witan must convene without delay. Any lord who sheltered Ælfric's conspirators will answer to the crown. She sealed the parchment with Edward's dragon sigil, her hand steady. Her son's future depended on this, on Edward's public endorsement of her actions, on the Witan's fear. Yet doubt crept in. Would Edward see her victory as loyalty or a threat? The chapel, gods and ghosts. That night, Ælfthryth sought the chapel's solitude. The air hung thick with incense, but no prayer rose to her lips. Instead, she knelt before the altar, Wulfstan's dagger laid across her palms, a token he'd given her years ago, when Athelred was still swaddled. "You asked if I regretted it," she murmured to the ghost only she could hear. "Never. But the price." Her fingers traced the blade's edge. Ethelflaed's accusation echoed. "You'll make Athelred a king of ashes." Was this her legacy? A son inheriting a kingdom webbed with fractures, bound by her violence? Footsteps sounded, light, hesitant. Athelred stood in the doorway, clutching a wooden knight. "Mother, I heard you." She hid the dagger swiftly. "Come, little king." He nestled against her, warmth seeping through her gown. "Will the bad men return?" "Not while I live," she vowed, kissing his brow. As his breathing slowed in sleep, Ælfthryth stared into the flickering candlelight. Somewhere beyond these walls, Edward read her words. Ethelflaed mourned. Traitors schemed. "Let them name me monster," she thought, gathering Athelred close. "So long as he is safe." Dawn would bring the Witan, fresh alliances to forge, and the whispers of new threats. But here, in the fragile dark, she was simply a mother, her love as ruthless as her crown. Foreshadowed. Edward's cold response arrives next morning, demanding her presence in Winchester, a summons that will lead to his fatal encounter at Corfe. Ethelflaed's bitterness festers, sowing seeds of future betrayal. In the Witan, one alderman's failed sympathy for Ælfric hints at a conspiracy deeper than blood. The rain lashed against Corfe's stone walls like the accusations Ælfthryth knew were coming. She stood in the drafty great hall, the scent of damp wool and wood smoke thick in the air, watching the courtyard below. Mud churned under the hooves of King Edward's returning escort. His banner, the Dragon of Wessex, hung limp and sodden. Her own heart felt much the same. He knows. Edward had been at Winchester, placating the Witan while she waged war. Now he returned to a castle echoing with the aftermath of her brutality. Ælfric's had spiked above the gatehouse, Edric's haunted silences, and the palpable fury radiating from Ethelflaed. Wulfston's pyre smoke still seemed to cling to the stones. The hall doors crashed open. Edward strode in, shedding his rain-slick cloak with a sharp gesture servants scrambled to catch. Water dripped from his beard, but it was the fire in his eyes that made Ælfthryth brace herself. He didn't look like her gentle, bookish son in that moment. He looked every inch a king wronged. "Mother." The single word cracked like a whip. He didn't stop, marching towards the high table where she stood. His thanes hung back, sensing the storm. "Explain this." He flung a hand towards the shuttered window, towards the gatehouse. "Explain why I ride back to my own fortress to find the head of an alderman, my alderman, rotting on a spike. Explain why thanes whisper of a battle fought in my absence, of men slaughtered, of you leading them." Ælfthryth met his gaze, her own steady despite the tremor in her hands hidden within her sleeves. "I defended your throne, Edward. Ælfric raised banners against you. Against us. Against you." Edward slammed a fist on the table, making the goblets jump. "Against the Monstrous Mother. That is the name echoing through Winchester. They say you butchered Ælfric after the battle. They say you threatened his children. They say you sent Edric into the fray, a child, and broke him." His voice rose, raw with disbelief and anger. "Is it true? Did you execute Ælfric without trial? Without consulting your king?" The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming rain and the crackle of the hearth fire. Ælfthryth saw the faces of her household, frozen in apprehension. She saw Athelred, small and pale near the fire, clutching a wooden horse, his eyes wide with fear, not of Edward, but of the fury directed at her. "What would you have had me do, Edward?" Her voice was low, controlled, cutting through his rage. "Wait for your return? Allow Ælfric to fortify Sherborne? To rally every disgruntled thane who whispers against your brother's right to inherit? To besiege us here?" She took a step closer, her voice dropping further, for his ears alone. "I saw the snake on his standard. The same snake that took Edric. He was Ordgar's ally, perhaps his puppet master. He threatened Ethelred's birthright, your legacy. I ended the threat. Swiftly, decisively, as a ruler must. Decisively? Barbarically." Edward hissed, spiking his head, displaying it. "That is not justice, mother. That is the act of a tyrant. It fuels the very fires you seek to quench. The Witan is terrified. Athelwold barely holds them in check. They see only your ruthlessness, not your reason. They see strength." Ælfthryth countered, her own temper flaring. They see what happens to traitors. Would you rather they saw weakness? Vacillation? An invitation to every ambitious lord to test the boy king they think will follow you? Athelred is 10. Edward. Do you think the wolves won't circle the moment you are gone if they do not fear the consequences? Edward recoiled slightly at the mention of his own mortality, the stark reality of Ethelred's vulnerability. He ran a hand over his face, the anger momentarily replaced by weary frustration. And Edric? Mother, in God's name. Ethelflaed is beside herself. She says he wakes screaming, that he cannot bear the sight of a sword. Did you truly need him on that field? Ælfthryth's mask slipped. A flicker of profound sorrow crossed her face. He followed Wulfstan. He sought vengeance for his own terror. I could not stop him without chaining him. Wulfstan died shielding him. Her voice thickened. I grieve for Edric. I grieve for Wulfstan. Every loss cuts me. But the field of battle is chaos, Edward. I cannot command where every arrow flies. Before Edward could respond, a commotion erupted near the hall entrance. Ethelflaed stood there, her usually gentle face contorted with grief and fury. She had clearly heard enough. She didn't approach the high table. Instead, her eyes, red-rimmed and blazing, locked onto Ælfthryth. You. Ethelflaed's voice, usually soft, was a ragged shout that silenced the hall. You did this. Your ambition. Your scheming. You filled my son's head with thoughts of vengeance, then let him run into that slaughterhouse. You took his innocence. You took his protector. She pointed a trembling finger, ignoring the king entirely. Wulfstan was a loyal man, a good man. And Edric, look at him. She gestured wildly towards the stairs where a servant was trying to coax a pale, silent Edric back to the upper chambers. He flinched at his mother's shout, shrinking back. He is broken, Ælfthryth. Broken by the horrors you orchestrated. You call yourself a mother? You are a destroyer. The accusation hung in the air, heavier than the rain. Ælfthryth felt the words like physical blows. She saw the truth in Edric's hollow eyes, the devastating echo of Ethelflaed's loss. She saw Edward's conflicted expression, sympathy for his aunt warring with his own anger at her. She saw Athelred, tears now streaming down his face, confused and scared by the hatred directed at his mother. Ælfthryth drew herself up to her full height. The Queen Mother, the regent, the woman who had just won a battle. The grief, the guilt, the monstrous label. She wrapped the cold mantle of necessity around them all. I did what was required, she stated, her voice ringing clear and cold in the sudden silence. For the kingdom, for Edward's crown, for Ethelred's future. She looked directly at Ethelflaed, her own eyes hard. Your son is alive, sister. He is safe within these walls. That safety was purchased with blood, including Wulfstan's. Grieve, rage, but do not mistake the cost of survival in this world for wanton destruction. She turned back to Edward, her expression unyielding. The threat is crushed.